right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Economic Matters. We're going to get started. I'm not sure if some of the members have already departed Annapolis or not, but with that said, members, for this afternoon, we're going to have a briefing on the state of housing. And if anyone here in the audience is new to Economic Matters, I'm the new incoming chair, Chris Valderrama, incoming vice chair, Lorik Charkoudian. Please know we are here to listen to you always. Our doors are open as much as our staff will let us be open. With that said, we're going to begin. Members, we have several panelists here from the Department of Housing and Community Development, MACO, MBIA, AOBA, MMHA, and then, of course, the Renters United Maryland Advocacy Group. With that said, we'll get started. To those who are testifying before us, it is my understanding that staff has informed you of your time allotment. Please, if you want to use up your time allotment, but if you're able to be concise and just say it in a few bullet points, that is great too, because I definitely want to allow for Q&A in case the members have any questions. As many of you know, the members know housing, land use, and zoning is a very new topic to Economic Matters, so we definitely are very appreciative of you coming before us to share your knowledge with us. With that said, we're going to start with the Department of Housing and Community Development. We have the Deputy Secretary, Julia Glanz, and Senior Policy Analyst, Jordan Gilmore. Welcome. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Julia Glanz. I'm the Deputy Secretary at Maryland's Department of Housing and Community Development. Joining me today is Jordan Gilmore, Senior Policy Analyst. Behind me for any tough questions are Greg Hare, Assistant Secretary of our Community Development Administration, and Danielle Meister, our Assistant Secretary for our Homeless Solutions Division. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. The Secretary is away at his monthly drill training and sends his regards. We're looking forward to working with you to address the housing crisis that drives affordability in our state so that we can ensure Maryland is a desirable place to live, young professionals to thrive, and businesses to locate. It's critical that Maryland keep up with the housing demand to lower costs for Marylanders and to grow our economy. We can't just meet the moment, we have to build for the future now. In Maryland, rents continue to rise. Since the pandemic, average rent figures show a more than 20% increase. The cost of housing has outpaced increases in other consumer prices. Since 2013, the median home value was $280,000, and today, homes are more than $436,000, an increase of 56%. And since 2010, median rents have risen by 42%. Even if you find a house you think you can afford, interest rates have made mortgages unachievable for most. The rates have remained high, most recently averaging 6.3%. For perspective, between 2012 and 2019, that rate averaged 4%. Additionally, between 2015 and 2022, the number of homes available for sale in Maryland decreased by 64%, as high interest rates lock out new generations of buyers. This especially impacts young families and our seniors. Since 2019, 9 in 10 newly cost-burdened homeowners have either been younger adults entering the market or seniors aging in place. As a general rule, households should spend no more than 30% of their household income on housing, meaning that above that 30% threshold, households start to make trade-offs with other life necessities. Households that pay more than 50% of their income on housing are considered severely cost-burdened and will generally have to make extremely hard choices on how to make ends meet. Because housing cost burdens reflect all other expenses as well as the household's income, this indicator is one of the most important data points for understanding the health of the housing market. More than half of Maryland renters are considered housing cost burdened, and nearly a quarter are severely cost burdened. Nearly 1 in 4 homeowners are also cost burdened. That, combined with the cost of food, healthcare, energy, and other essentials, pushes higher costs of living on our residents, which means they'll spend less on goods and services and reduces the state's economic activity. Maryland ranks 42nd among the states for housing affordability and is the 8th highest in the total cost of living, the highest among our neighbors. This problem is only worsening. Polling from the Maryland Association of Realtors has shown 42% of younger renters are considering leaving Maryland due to housing costs. That's our professional workforce, the teachers, healthcare, tech innovators, first responders who are essential to our future. As housing costs push them out, we risk losing the talent and expertise that drive our economy and make our communities thrive. We're investing in a world-class education here in Maryland for our children, only to have them take their degrees to other states in which they can afford to live. This migration is largely driven by young Marylanders ages 17 to 34, who account for 64% of the outmigration in 2022, nearly 40,000 people. Where are we losing these folks to? It's not just Florida and Texas. We're losing them to Virginia and Pennsylvania, our neighbors. Housing costs and long commutes are the top 2 reasons they're leaving for neighboring states, making it more critical that we focus on transit-oriented development. By building closer to transit hubs and job centers, we can alleviate pressure on infrastructure, reduce vehicle miles traveled, and lower carbon footprints, all while keeping our workforce here and supporting sustainable growth. Despite the escalating need, the state continues to underproduce, with supply that stifles our economy and limits affordable options, especially for our young and senior populations. Over the last 10 years, Maryland has underproduced housing at a rate of 5,600 units per year on average. This underproduction rate reflects the difference between Maryland's population growth and the new housing construction. The latest shows that in 2024, there were more than 1,600 less units permitted than the prior year. And on average, we're producing 38% fewer homes today than we were before the 2008 crash. According to the Maryland Comptroller's housing report released last year, Maryland housing stock has grown substantially slower than most of the state it loses its residents to. Since 2000, states have added housing at roughly twice Maryland's pace, growing 44 to 50% compared to 21% in Maryland. And in 2024, the Carolinas, Texas, and Florida permitted around 3 times more housing units per 1,000 households than Maryland did. The state needs to increase housing production in order to bring prices down. Just a 10% increase in housing supply correlates to nearly $500 in annual savings for renters. While Maryland's housing production has stagnated since the 2008 recession, the city of Austin has more than doubled the number of housing units permitted each year. This has had real returns for the residents of Austin, as rents have decreased 17% from a peak in 2022. These rent decreases have sustained even as the Austin metro area remains one of the fastest growing population centers in the nation. This is just one example. Research from other US and international cities has consistently shown that broadly increasing market-wide housing supply helps decrease prices. Maryland's economy has been stagnant since 2017, and it cannot grow without addressing housing cost and availability. Our state GDP stagnation represents billions of dollars in foregone economic activity. The real estate sector in Maryland has underperformed the nation overall to the tune of $12 billion since 2017. And the construction sector has underperformed by $4.2 billion. Statewide, we need 100,000 units to meet the current demand for housing. And it's not surprising that rising housing costs also affect those seeking shelter. Rapidly increasing housing costs have exacerbated housing instability. While homelessness in general has been on the decline for the past several years in Maryland, there are signs that several subpopulations are at increasing risk for greater homelessness, including seniors, veterans, and youth. A key driver of rising homelessness among these groups is a shortage of the type of housing that these groups need, permanent supportive housing, which pairs subsidized housing with support services. In fiscal year 25, an estimated 22,000 Marylanders, including 2,200 families with children, experienced homelessness. These numbers have increased each year since 2021. There are only 4 available and affordable housing units for every 10 extremely low-income households in Maryland. And I want to emphasize that housing instability is not just about being homeless. It has many dimensions: struggling to pay for housing, moving a lot, facing eviction, staying with friends or family to save money, dealing with poor quality housing, or being in neighborhoods without transportation, good schools, and that are less safe. Many of us are just one car accident, health issue, family death, or job loss away from housing instability. Federal budget and job cuts have impacted Maryland more than other states in the nation. the federal administration's intent to cut permanent supportive housing, as well as criminalize and involuntarily commit unsheltered people, leaves Maryland even more vulnerable to homelessness than in the past. HUD's 2024-25 NOFO for local continuums of care would have caused more than 2,400 households to lose their housing overnight and undone the state's progress to end homelessness. A federal court has temporarily blocked HUD from implementing these policy changes, requiring it to return to the status quo of the 2024 NOFO and for it to start the awards process. And we expect a judgment in February, which will inform the future policy. And Maryland voters recognize the effect high housing costs have on their wallets and their economic stability. 84% of Maryland voters believe the cost of housing is too high. And 74% of Maryland voters believe there is not enough housing for people with moderate incomes, up from 46% in 2020. And 71% of Maryland voters believe the government should reduce barriers to new housing. So the question is, how does government do that? There are many factors that contribute to housing affordability, many beyond our control in government. We can't control the cost of plywood or interest rates. But what we can do is address local regulatory uncertainty, delays, and impact fees that increase the cost of housing, resulting in less housing and higher costs for Marylanders. Local zoning and land use authority is the #1 factor within our influence and control. The state has already succeeded in setting the rules, The state has already succeeded in setting the rules on where not to build. Maryland was the first state to hit its 30% land conservation goal 6 years early, proving that coordinated state efforts work. Now, the same clarity and coordination that told us where not to build needs to be applied to where and how we should build. Of all the land zoned for residential use in the entirety of Maryland, only 11% is zoned for high or even medium density development. Generally, zoning and land use regulations at the local level encourage the construction of larger homes, causing McMansion sprawl. In fact, most current zoning regulations make smaller housing effectively illegal in many communities. And when I say smaller housing, I'm not talking about tiny homes or accessory dwelling units. I'm talking about re-legalizing our existing neighborhoods and the kinds of homes that we used to build. Neighborhoods and homes that Maryland already has and loves. Annapolis, Parkville, Towson, District Heights, to name a few. These are walkable, established neighborhoods with modest homes that would be illegal to build today. We need a wide variety of housing options in all sizes. But in many communities, the government is explicitly prohibiting less expensive housing options from being permitted and built. Just by building different types of housing, we can help retain residents in our state. For example, townhomes are typically 25 to 30% less expensive than traditional single-family homes. Additionally, regulatory uncertainty and permitting process in Maryland increase costs to build housing. Regulations are unclear or are subject to discretionary interpretations that vary from reviewer to reviewer in the same jurisdiction. Lack of simultaneous reviews causes timeline delays. Lack of regulatory certainty and early vesting means projects may need to be redesigned or completely stalled if regulatory processes change midway through long approval processes. This in particular is often the tactic used by locals to delay or destroy housing projects. Whether it's a new application, a sudden passage of new fees by the town council, a change to a setback requirement, all of these are examples of currently legal, but often lethal examples of that bring slow death to projects by continually moving the goalpost back. A recent nationwide analysis shows the typical multifamily project takes about 15 months to plan and 12 months to build. In contrast, planning documents from one developer in Prince George's County reveal needing 42 months for planning and permitting and about 12 months for construction. The governor's housing package addresses issues we do have control over. The Starter and Silver Homes Act would increase housing options and allow for smaller affordable housing. And the Housing Certainty Act, sponsored by Senator Augustine and Delegate Baylor, would increase certainty by locking in local regulations at the time of project approval and defer the collection of development impact fees. We look forward to talking about these bills at their upcoming hearings in February. And we aren't just getting started on this work. We worked in partnership with the General Assembly in 2024 to pass the governor's housing package, which marked a turning point in the state as we laid the groundwork for Maryland's growth for decades to come. Together, we created the Maryland Community Investment Corporation, the first state-sponsored community development entity, established the state's first ever Office of Tenant and Landlord Affairs, incentivized development in the places where it should be, and implemented the first in the nation statewide right of first refusal law. And last year, Governor Moore signed the Housing Starts Here executive order, which accelerates development of housing on state-owned land, reduces state agency permitting timelines, accelerates distribution of funding for affordable housing, creates a state housing ombudsman position, and he started last week, and establishes housing production targets and incentives for meeting goals. And the department published the state's first housing targets report on January 1st of this year. It shows that Maryland is projected to need an additional 185,000 units by 2030 for projected households. The state would need to effectively double the current permitting rate. While that isn't feasible in the next year, doubling it through sustained policy reform over the next 5 years is both achievable and imperative to address the devastating impact the current lack of housing availability has on Maryland households. We must build housing in places where people are and where they need it. When we build in places like this, that's a housing unit that's not being built out further in the landscape on what was farmland or forest, protecting Maryland's treasures. That's housing unit that's a little bit closer to transit and jobs, so infrastructure isn't stretched. So vehicle miles traveled and ultimately carbon footprints can be reduced while making life a little bit easier for our residents. We look forward to working with Maryland General Assembly to make this happen. And with that, thank you, and I'll be happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. Mr. Gilmore, will you be speaking as well?
I'm here to answer any
okay.
questions.
Okay, with that said, we'll start off with Delegate Ahrens.
Thank you. A lot of information, a lot of statistics. I'll start off with, what's your solution?
Our solution is more supply.
Okay. What's an affordable house? Tell me a dollar amount.
We need homes at every spectrum of the price range. We're not talking about just the affordable properties that we do finance at DHCD, but ensuring that there's options for all income levels.
Okay. Keeping affordability and all this stuff, and again, you talked about a lot of this stuff. Some of the reasons, you look at where the 8th highest cost of living, that's a big problem, yet it's a luxury to some degree. If you're able to live here, you're able to afford it. But I guess when I start looking at housing across the state, and we talk about affordable housing, the size of the house has to matter, the cost to build a house per square foot cost, and I don't know how you take the genie out of, put it back in a bottle right now on this. Because costs are something that's very significant. That's cost to build a home. Because we want to build a cheap house doesn't mean we ever can. And what is cheap enough to get people in a house?
Sure.
Correct?
What was the question there?
What's cheap? What's the cheapest enough? Give me the dollar amount to put the lowest paid person you think we can put in a home. How much does that house have to cost?
Well, sir, our Starter and Silver Home Act enables builders to build homes that are on smaller lots, are smaller square footage. So again, on average, I think we can bring the prices down about $100,000. Again, going back to townhomes, they're 25 to 30% cheaper. So again, trying to target different income brackets. Again, it's going to depend on the jurisdiction.
I think there's a lot more to it than just talking about it. That's what I'm saying. If you're going to put an affordable home in, say, Cambridge versus putting it into Queen Anne's County, two different dollar amounts, but the cost of labor is still there. All those costs are there. Density, you have all the issues with the counties and the towns. Infrastructure is huge on the Eastern Shore. And I know you mentioned something here about everybody moving back to the cities, which I think that was Planned Maryland with Governor O'Malley. It's a great idea because that's where the infrastructure is. I guess I'm looking for something definable that we can sit back and say, what can we start acting on in my counties, my district, to actually accomplish this? Now, my county I live in, they pretty much want to stop all buildings whatsoever. So how are we going to do that? There's no allocation left. And Maryland Department of Health, Maryland Department of the Environment are sitting back saying we don't want any more groundwater penetration, which is sewers, septics, not sewer. So I guess these are the things are bigger challenges at the state level. How does the state plan on helping a county like Queen Anne's County, Cecil County, Caroline County, Kent County? Not only because we have location issues in some of those, but we also have infrastructure issues. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're looking for. We all appreciate we need these houses. But again, there's nothing sitting down here saying how I can tell you or you can tell me what I can do to fix this problem and get it moving today. Is there?
Well, I think the legislation that we're putting forward this year is a piece to the puzzle. Also, the governor's executive order requires us to work with our partners across state government, MDE.
I haven't seen that legislation. What, if you were to give me a piece of it, what would it be?
So the Starter and Silver Homes Act is talking about reducing the lot sizes in all jurisdictions in single-family neighborhoods, again, allowing for smaller homes to be built. What I referenced to, the neighborhoods that we love, that are super charming, we're going to be able to decrease the size of the property, which again will reduce the construction materials, bring down the cost for the home buyer at the end of the line.
Is there something in there about density and infrastructure? Is there anything in that bill about that? Somebody's nodding behind you.
We're going to bring these, they haven't had hearings yet.
Okay.
Be happy to have a briefing with you to get into the weeds on
I'd
this.
love to, because I sell homes for a living, and you have a laudable goal. I love your goal, except that, you know what, houses aren't selling that fast right now. We apparently have more houses for sale now than we did a year ago, and I don't know what changed that we need all these new houses. We haven't got an influx of people are leaving. So what are we going to do about the homes that are already built that are too big or something to that effect?
Well, and that's why we're putting forward legislation that would enable the building of smaller homes, again, to target those lower income individuals.
Okay, I'd love to see those. But I do appreciate all the information you gave. You've given us a ton of information on why we can't do it. I'm not seeing how we do it based on what you told me. I agree with a lot of what you said as far as cost, I get that.
We'll follow up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Chi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation, succinct and informative, and I also want to commend DHCD for your leadership. I'm a huge fan of your secretary, who's a great champion, not just regionally, but nationally on housing across all counties. I think housing is one of those issues that everyone can relate to, regardless of your income level, and I think it's sort of at the intersection of economy as a larger force that shapes that, but also community culture as well as the regulatory environment. You touched on some of that, but let's just talk about the elephant in the room, which is the NIMBYism, right? We have some supposedly progressive communities who don't want any affordable housing in their own communities, which lead to local leaders sometimes cave in to their will and stop what should have happened in those communities, right? So we need to address the community culture and local authorities in terms of the ability to stop a lot of good things from happening. It's not easy. So it's not one thing, it's many different things, right? But let's go back to the point that you made earlier, which is young people, which I care a lot about, because oftentimes they don't have the voices to speak for themselves, because they're oftentimes so mobile, right? They move around and don't vote and don't engage in one local place, even the places that raised them. And I think we are now at a point where our housing is as unaffordable as the rest of the capital region. And I'm mostly familiar with the capital region communities, right? But we can also talk about like a Baltimore, greater Baltimore area as unaffordable. If our housing is almost as expensive as what's across the river in Northern Virginia, but our jobs are not competitive. Our business climate is not competitive. And we're not growing the economy that help our people by giving them the ladder they need to afford a higher level housing, correct? Mm-hmm. So I would like for you to comment on that as well, because housing supply is only one way to solve the problem. We also need to elevate our economy so that our people can afford to stay in better homes.
Mm-hmm. Sure, thank you for that, Delegate. DHCD's mission is to enable more housing to be built and to ensure that we have great places that people want to move to. And so that goes back to that community culture point that you raised. We need more supply. That has to be a part of the puzzle to grow our economy. And with that, building great places, our neighborhood revitalization division that gives lots of grants to communities to build incredible communities and to revitalize incredible communities. is the other side of the coin. We have to build places that people want to live, where there's jobs, where there's culture, where there's businesses. And so it's two sides of the coin, and we're focused on both of those equally.
I'm sorry. So could you be specific when you say we have regulatory issues and all of that? Because Montgomery County, for example, I think it was about 2 years ago when the county council voted to pass the rent stabilization policy, right, which is very well intentioned. But I immediately read a whole bunch of things, data that don't support that kind of policy, to say it has immediate adverse impact on housing supply. Could you comment on that?
Sure, Delegate. So briefly, the issue with rent stabilization, rent control is, as you said, very well-intentioned measure that does help out current renters. The problem is it causes production to the incentive for production to decrease. If builders, developers, whoever know that in the future the amount of rent they're going to be able to collect from a particular property is going to be limited. Based on affordability requirements, they're less likely to invest in that sort of project.
Could you share some data on that front, please?
We'll be happy to get that to you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, Montgomery County, thank you.
Delegate Boifo.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and to Madam Deputy Secretary. Thank you for being here, and to DHCD for all the work you guys are doing. As the committee's resident young person, I think I'd be remiss not to ask this question. I mean, as I look at slide 5, it's kind of really sad, and I know it's not of anyone's fault in particular when it comes to folks in government or people in this room, but you think about the state of Maryland, you think about the 3 dozen plus universities that we have, how we have been an anchor on the East Coast for a lot of young people coming to the state of Maryland, and to see the migration happening is just kind of heartbreaking. I'm curious because as I look at this slide here, West Virginia at number 2, Pennsylvania at 26. You mentioned Virginia also doing really well. You may not have this answer, but I am curious if you can provide this information. And I know some of it is economic, right? I mean, some of it is about job performance and the type of jobs that people are actually going for in Virginia and other states. But I am curious if you were to do a state-by-state comparison with Virginia, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, what are they doing that's not necessarily just attracting young people, but from a housing standpoint, what are they doing that we could be implementing here in Maryland? So I just want to put that on the record to ask that if you guys could get back to me with some of that information. I'd be curious to kind of see a side-by-side analysis of the states that are doing a really good job at building housing at a rapid pace. And my final question here is really about supply. Look, I come from local government, like many of us, I think, on this committee do. And let me tell you, zoning issues was very confusing when I was there for the first 2 years on the city council. But I'm curious, have there been any conversations at the state level or at DHCD about land use and zoning at the state level? Not a one-size-fits-all approach, because not every county is the same, not every process should be the same. But can we, and have there been conversations about how we kind of alleviate the burden on those who want to actually build housing here in the state, and kind of have a one-size-fit-all approach when it comes to land use and zoning?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the 2 bills that you'll see, the Starter and Silver Homes Act and the Housing Certainty Act, touch on that. And again, it's not coming with a hammer. We're trying to do delicate approaches here because we know this is, important subject to many locals. But so it addresses that in that it's not allowing local governments to move the goalposts during a development process of enacting new setback laws, adding more hearings on, things like that. So we're touching there. And then again, on allowing for smaller lots to be built and smaller square footage homes to be built. Again, a lot of those homes are illegal to build today. Homes that a home that I live in Greenbelt would be illegal to build today. Jordan.
Yeah, and Delegate, just to add briefly to what Deputy Secretary Glanz said about the regulatory environment changing, and your question about what other neighboring states are doing that we're not, Virginia and Pennsylvania are two examples of states that do have rules in place saying local jurisdictions cannot change the rules on a housing development even after construction has started, like they're allowed to here in Maryland.
Yeah, and I think Delegate Chi hit it on the head when she mentioned that there are communities who just don't want to have folks in their area. And look, again, as a former city council member, I get it. But the reality is that we have to build at a rapid pace. My last question is, are those two bills emergency bills? And could we find some time to sync up offline just so I can get a better understanding of those bills?
We certainly can.
Thank you.
Delegate Ampry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for coming today and providing this information. And thank you for coming with a sense of urgency for a solution. I think often at times we, especially in the climate of our nation right now, they're always talking about what's wrong. And it's fine to talk about what's wrong, but I thank you all for coming in with like some hard-hitting solutions. And I look forward to discussing these bills and having the opportunity to really work through them in this committee. A couple of questions I have. Delegate Waffle is reading my mind on some of them, so you saved them some time because you already answered some questions for me. But wanted to get a sense on slide 5. I see that DC is not on here. Is there affordability ranking for DC? Was that something that wasn't included?
So those rankings were from the U.S. News state ranking of the 50
states.
states. So I don't think.
I just want to get an idea because I know Maryland, we're just a more dense state, so it's hard to compare sometimes to Virginia and Pennsylvania, and I think that DC would have been a good metric. Just wondering there. But also, I just want to know. I know that we have an understanding of what's not working in Maryland as far as getting more housing online, and it truly is a supply issue. Wanted to get a better understanding if your department has done any analyzation of. I think that, I'm always reflecting on, I've been here 6 years, and I'm reflecting on what bills have I passed or have we passed that maybe just didn't hit the mark on what we had hoped it would do. So I want to get an idea if you all done any analyzation of like, what if we passed in the past 10 years here in Annapolis that maybe hasn't worked how we thought it should work, or maybe did the opposite of what we thought it should do? Because I want to make sure that as we're, putting forward, we always think that we have the best new idea that's going to fix something. Want to get an idea, was there anything you all look back on to say, hey, this wasn't the best step, or this isn't working as we thought it would work, et cetera? Because it sounds like you understand the issue. Since 2008, we haven't had the housing grow as it should have. But is there anything that we missed the mark on in Annapolis that we could have done better? Just want to get an idea if you all have any thoughts on that.
That's a great question. That's something that we can get back to you on, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. And then the last question is, just in general, it's always hard sitting with these maps and you see like states right next door doing a little better at us or something. Is there anything that you can, the solutions you all are offering are great, I think. Or is there anything that they're doing nearby that is just like we could do faster or better to replicate? Like just get a sense of like what is happening in these other states that are right next door that's allowing them to be so successful?
Well, yes. So the governor's executive order is requiring all agencies that have a permitting function or us getting dollars out the door here at DHCD to look internally and to speed up timelines in review and getting permits out the door. So that's something that all state agencies are doing, and that report will be made public March 1st, because we want to make sure that we've got all of our stuff in order before we're asking anybody else to do the same thing. But also this early vesting bill that Jordan was chatting about in locking in regulations. So when you come in and submit your plan to build, the regulations which are in play on that day are the ones that carry through till you're putting a shovel in the ground. And our neighboring states are doing that much better than we are.
Awesome. All right, well, look forward to working with you all. We're going to see a lot of each other this session. Looking forward to it.
Delegate Howard.
So you talked about housing based on transportation. Is that based on, are you talking about that based on current transportation infrastructure or projected, or both?
If I'm not mistaken, it's current TOD, transit-oriented development, locations that are.
Current?
Yes.
So it would not be based on ones that would be projected transportation projects.
Let me double check and get back to you on that.
I would imagine that you would. And is there any concern that you would be usurping local control to remove local community voices and control by supporting bills that would remove local controls and therefore removing redress by the community in the court system as well?
Well, thank you for that question. The polling data that I referenced earlier, it says that our residents want us to build. They want us to build faster. They want government to act. And so obviously we want to hear from our constituents consistently and constantly, but they are telling us that they want us to take action. And so I think we're trying to listen to them.
I'm a politician and I love polls, but I also know that polls fall off quickly when you get to question 2 and question 3 and question 4. So they may want you to rebuild quickly, but then when you get to question 2, which is we will remove your voice at the council level or at the city level, at the alderman level, that drops off quickly. And then what drops off even more quickly is when you also follow that up with, by usurping those local controls, we will also remove your voice in redress in the judicial system, should they have any. That would fall off very quickly as well. So I think that's something that the committee and the agency should keep in mind moving forward. I appreciate the Delegate Baylor's bill, but at the same time, communities are unique. They have unique needs. And just because they bring those needs forward at a time that may be inconvenient for the agency or for housing in general does not negate those voices. My community is rural. They expect it to stay rural. They want to protect the rural nature and beauty of South County. And it's not because of NIMBY. It's because of long-standing uniform practices exercised at the local level that they expect those expectations to remain in effect. So I'd be very careful, and I certainly will be, in any support of legislation moving forward that says the alternate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Chair. And Deputy Secretary, good to see you. As you know, I'm a business owner in Salisbury. Jake Day was our mayor for a number of years. So for my entire 12-year political life, I've known you and Jake as being advocates for housing. And while we'll have policy differences that will certainly show up, I think that we all have this passion for the most important aspect of living in our communities, and that is housing. What's the quality of it? Is there flexibility in housing? You know, Montgomery County, I heard Lily Chee talk about her issues, and those are different issues than we have on the Eastern Shore. And I would understand, based on conversations we've had in the past, certainly a mayor from Salisbury, that that's a different community than, say, Towson, for example. And so with all that being said, I think there's a joined interest to do better when it comes to housing. Maryland needs this desperately. On the graph that you had here addressing the cost of housing, I would just flag a couple of additional regulatory uncertainties for both people that own housing, but also rent. And first and most important of those is energy cost. And, you know, look, if you're a tenant and you're paying $1,000 a month for rent, and your energy prices are going up double, instead of a $200 or $300 bill, it's $500 or $600. I think most tenants are having to make a choice. Do I keep the heat on in the wintertime, or do I pay my rent? And they're choosing the heat. They're having to make sure they have a shelter, and it's more difficult to not pay the power bill in that setting. So that's the one thing I just would want to flag. And the other, which is a more emerging issue, is property taxes. Now, I can personally relate to what's happening with property taxes. These increases are coming fast and furious. These 3-year assessments, phase-in assessments are coming in, and surely the tax policies of any government agency are paid ultimately by the consumer, in this case, the tenant or the property owner. And I would just share with you that those costs are directly being translated into the rents that tenants are being paid. And these are pressures that I don't see relief for. And unless you see it differently, I care and worry a great deal about the ongoing quality of people's lives as it comes to housing affordability. When we've got these sort of government, the government is capable of addressing some of these, both from tax and energy policy, but yet it doesn't seem like we're necessarily doing that. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'd be curious.
Thank you for those questions. The Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development also hosts in Assistant Secretary Hare's shop, a number of energy assistance programs for folks that are on the lower income spectrum, but that can shore up their property if they're, taking care of envelope issues, getting newer, more efficient technology in homes to reduce costs, to bring down energy costs. But I certainly recognize that energy is a very important topic for many Marylanders this year. But we are a resource, so please send folks our way. And then additionally, on the flip side, on one side, raising, having higher property taxes when you go to sell is a benefit, right? But it boxes people in while they're in there if they can't continue to pay those annual tax bills. Again, coming back to supply, having more options for folks to move into. A lot of folks are stuck with low interest rates, but seeing those tax bills come at a burden.
So my second point, thank you for those comments. MDE is a problem. All right, now it's the same problem as, say, the IRS is. It's a regulatory burden that has to be met, and with that comes the cost of compliance or, the fear of regulatory citation for noncompliance. And when we talk about making smaller lot sizes, as an Eastern Shore representative, what my ears are hearing are single-family lots for which say, for example, a 12 or 1,400 square foot, 3-bedroom rancher could be built on. My grandfather started a company in 1964 as a home builder, and guess what he built in the 60s and the 70s? 3-bedroom ranchers. What can't be built, for reasons that may go to land use and zoning, but more importantly, it can't be built because MDE won't allow the kind of housing development free of sewer and water, okay? And I deem that to be an essential problem because, and then I'll ask you for your comment, because if you go to Delaware and see, we're from Salisbury, so this is something we can relate to. Delaware has been building left and right. Now, they might not be building 1,200 square foot ranchers, that's a different issue. But the fact is, Delaware has been building and creating supply. Now, maybe to the detriment. Maybe their MDE or whatever their version of stormwater management has not been as rigorous as we have in Maryland. But notwithstanding, Delaware seems to have built plenty of homes. It's so hard to get from Salisbury to Lewis because of it. So comment on MDE and how do you view that relationship between developers and trying to get single-family lots developed through the lens of septic systems?
Thank you, Delegate. So as I mentioned, our ombudsman position started last week, Stephen Palmer. He is going to be key in working out some of these issues and raising up some of these policy issues that need to be addressed to make inroads here. So I would, we'll be calling on him to try to tackle some of these things. DHCD and MDE are working closer together than I think we ever have before and trying to navigate some of these challenges. So I'm hopeful that we can work through some of that.
Yeah, on that one, I'm very hopeful that you can, because that's one of these regulatory uncertainties that fall under the ledger of the developer. And I think that's something we have to deal with. Look, the state can do what it needs to do from stormwater management, but if we're talking about smaller lot sizes, unless we're only talking about water and sewer, we almost surely are talking about at least some single-family residential lots on septic systems, and that burden is almost insurmountable from the Eastern Shore. I don't know that I have anything else to say other than I will look forward to working with your department. I'm a small business guy that gets it and is in the business, so to speak, and so I see your side of it. I also see the side of Delegate Howard, and therein lies the beauty of policy making and sausage making here in Annapolis, and I look forward to that particular exercise.
Thank you.
Delegate Bandari.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Your presentation reminds me of the basic microeconomic relationship that we all learn in the graduate school. When supply increases in a constrained market, prices are just downward, no matter what. And you also mentioned the Austin example. Austin expanded permits, shifted the supply curve outward, and rents fell. If we try to run that same experiment in our state, with zoning rule, I want you to be a little bit more specific. We have to start somewhere else, like whether single-family only zoning or minimum lot sizes, parking minimums, or height caps near transit, most rigidly fixes our supply curve in place, in which specific provision in our code makes that Austin outcome structurally impossible here.
Can you say your question again? I'm sorry.
I mean, my question is like, what specific zoning rule that we need to change to have the outcome of the Austin that, you
Sure.
You mentioned in your presentation?
Well, I think our Housing Certainty Act bill that'll come before you, and we're happy to dig into the weeds on that with you prior to the hearing, will create some certainty for developers, enable more homes to be built. Again, looking at the starter and silver home bills, getting smaller homes built, again, to bring prices down. The two of those should help with that supply issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our final question for this panel would be Vice Chair Charkoudian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the presentation. I just wanted to clarify something earlier, and I'll just be transparent about providing my thoughts on it and asking you to respond, which is that, first of all, I agree, and I'm thrilled that we have DHCD in front of us saying we have a supply and demand issue, and we have to make really hard decisions this year about how we're really going to crack the nut of getting more supply built. That ultimately, long-term, getting that supply built will have a downward pressure on housing costs, for sure. But when we have a tight supply, there's also a need to prevent price gouging or taking advantage of people who are stuck, who are here and could be taken advantage of because they don't have a lot of other choices because of the tight supply. And so that's really where rent stabilization comes into play. And in my mind, it's important that we're walking and chewing gum at the same time, that we're able to build more, really take that issue on, and also really protect people who are here from the fact that if you own a home, you can take advantage of the fact that housing is of such tight supply and continue to increase rent as much as you want in the absence of rent stabilization and other renter protections. So it had been my understanding that that was DHCD's position, and I just was confused by your answer to Delegate Chi's question, and so I just wanted to check in to see if I had that right.
Sure, yeah, thank you for that question, Madam Vice Chair. Just to clarify, I was responding merely relating to the supply issue, citing some of the academic research that's been done on the topic. It's certainly not DHCD's official position, to be telling Montgomery County or any county, for that matter, what they should be doing as far as renter protections, that sort of thing.
So I'm curious about what DHCD's position is on the ability to have both a policy that actively increases supply, working in partnership with those who build, but also protecting renters in the spaces that they're in right now.
Sure. We're not really taking a position on that. Our bills this session are focused on increasing supply.
So does DHCD have a position?
Not at this moment.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary. And Mr. Gilmore, I would respectfully request for the questions that you said you would let the members know you get back to them. If you could do that, I'm sure they greatly appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for presenting. Members, we're going to move on to our second panel. We have MACO and MML before us, Dominic Buchko and Angelica Bailey-Tupari. You can begin whenever you're ready.
You got the computer, or do you want to do it?
You do it.
Okay. Do we switch the PowerPoint on?
Pardon?
Do we switch to our PowerPoint on this one, or?
Oh.
Awesome, thank you.
We're easy to please.
Well,
All right. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. We are very happy to be in the House Environment and We are used to being in the House Environment and Transportation Committee talking about these issues, but we're very happy to be in Economic Matters instead.
Thrilled.
So thank you all for having us. I'm Angelica Bailey-Thupari, Director of Public Policy and Advocacy for the Maryland Municipal League.
I'm Dom Buchko, Director of Intergovernmental Relations for MACO.
And we are going to try not to bore you with some interesting tidbits about how housing and zoning interacts with local governments and our role in this big whole issue. So this is very complex, as I think we all know. We don't have a ton of time, so Dom and I are just going to focus primarily on how locals are part of the overall housing ecosystem, kind of keep it high level, but we are very eager for your questions and for collaboration moving forward. So where do local governments fit? We are responsible primarily for regulating land use. So that's, as Dom likes to say, the look, smell, and feel of our communities. We decide what goes where and when. We set development standards. We are also responsible for developing and maintaining comprehensive or master plans. So we have to balance housing, transportation, economic development, environmental protection, and public services as we're making these long-term determinations on our communities. We have to ensure that development can be supported by our infrastructure. Especially for municipalities, we rely very heavily on property taxes. So land use decisions directly affect our ability to provide quality services to our residents. And then we're responsible for implementing these changes as well. And implementation capacity is sort of an internal type of infrastructure that doesn't get spoken about as much, but directly impacts both counties and municipalities. For MML, 113 of our 157 municipalities have populations of 5,000 or less. They have small staffs, many of whom are part-time. Local governments are used to doing more with less, but we have to consider speed, predictability, and cost when we make these zoning and planning decisions. And so this is a core reason that land use and zoning has historically been local. If we ignore implementation results, even the best intended policy just will not work. And then finally, one last layer of complexity, the whole process does involve, as Delegate Howard alluded to, substantial public community input. This is a democratic process, and officials answer directly to the people living with the consequences of these decisions. Local leaders have a responsibility to try to balance a plan for growth with a duty to our residents and taxpayers who already call these communities home.
So if we can take a step back on this slide, really what is the role of local government? Why are MACO and MML, counties and municipalities here? At the core of it, we're not monsters, we're measured, and we have to be, because we are operating the infrastructure, we are working with the communities deciding the look, smell, and feel. DHCD uses wonderful words, and I love their messaging, like legal but lethal and tactic. That's not what it is. We have to implement the policies of the state. We have to make sure the literal trains are running on time, that when you flush the toilet, the wastewater treatment facility has the capacity to treat that sludge. We are on the ground implementing, and while we get that a certain state agency has the impetus to push housing forward, we have to balance everything else. And so, again, we're not monsters, but because of the role that the state granted us, we have to be measured. And so, zooming in on that, the best way to think of housing is to put the entire policy area into three big buckets. First, what's fixable? What could we at the state level as well as the local level, what can we do today? Second, where are there major trade-offs? And I think that's going to be a really big theme this session. Where are we going to have to make some cost-benefit analysis and reprioritize? The comptroller had a report on housing earlier that came out this summer, and they talked about the Smith Island cake effect, where Maryland, we are a small state with really big goals, and every session we're trying to achieve more, but that does have a building effect where you're creating more and more barriers, and we have to reprioritize what's a priority. And then second, and DHCD touched on this somewhat, what are realities that don't have an easy solution? Just if we get everything right in the first two buckets, that doesn't mean that we're going to see the development we want to, because we operate in a broader ecosystem. So first, let's talk about that first bucket. What's fixable? Better processes. Counties and municipalities are working. We've heard the message loud and clear. We're going to talk about a fabulous housing bill next, Bambi, but how can we do our processes better at the state and local level? We need to move faster. We recognize that. Regulatory and construction certainty. This is an issue that you talked about a lot. This is an issue that MACO has been working on extensively over the interim. We have had a lot of positive conversations with MBIA, as well as the administration, and I am confident by the end of this session, if not sooner, we are going to have a way to clean up regulatory certainty. It's a fact. When a complete application comes in, it should be evaluated by the standards at the time of the complete application. It's just like you're playing Monopoly. No one likes to play Monopoly with someone that changes the rules. Additionally, design guidelines, streamlining processes, making sure that predictability is easier. Market tools. How can we use the market tools of state and local government to get the outcomes we want without totally blowing up our general fund? How can we encourage affordable housing over here while saying you're doing a little bit better over there and maybe you should take additional burden? For major trade-offs, this is a big one, and some of these questions don't come before this committee, but they do come before the General Assembly. Forest conservation, adequate public facilities, building codes, electrification, et cetera. If we are going to move towards building energy performance standards, the argument is you're going to pay more upfront, but you're going to save more money in the long run. Well, you still do have to deal with that upfront cost very early. Same thing with fire suppression. There's big questions that we need to ask and answer. And then things that aren't within our realm of control, interest rates, national trends, et cetera. Even if we do everything right in those first two buckets, that third bucket has such a major impact. We need to recognize that.
A good example, too, is property tax credits. We hear about this a lot. There are many of them are proposed every session. And this is an interesting example of a trade-off for local governments. Yes, they can increase home ownership or the ability to financially purchase a home, but they cost local governments potential revenue. And that restricts our ability to continue to provide services, as I said earlier. 25% of Maryland residents call a municipality home, but we only have 4% of the land area. So we're, like I said, we're no strangers to doing more with less, but our ability to grow and to literally tangibly develop is limited, and there are very few ways for us to generate revenue. So property taxes are one of our only vehicles, unfortunately. So it is a fair incentive in theory, but it does have some hard realities for municipalities and counties.
All right, so moving on really quick, the Building Affordably in My Backyard, or BAMBI Act. At the end of the 2025 legislative session, both chambers were incredibly resolute in their message that they expected local government to come to the table and be proactive stakeholders in moving Maryland's housing crisis forward. You did not want to see opposition. You wanted locally driven solutions to move the needle. Counties have been working extensively over the interim to develop a housing package that does just that, and that's BAMBI. There are 4 pillars here, so land use, market tools, state actions, and protecting renters. And again, all of these have been developed and driven with the subject matter experts on the ground who are implementing this every day. So first, more certainty for builders and residents. I think we talked about that a lot already. Making sure that when you put an application in, it's evaluated by the standards at the time of submission. Smarter timing for fees and that fund infrastructure. So there's a big debate that's going to happen about impact fees and excise taxes. Basically, this is the mechanism that we use when we say a project's going to come in, you're going to need to expand the wastewater treatment facility, expand the school, you're going to have new roads, et cetera. How do we fund that? Traditionally, we fund that with impact fees and excise taxes. There's a question right now about, is the timing of those right, and are we really aligning the policy there with how current projects are funded in the private sector, and are we creating some externalities there, and is there a way to realign that timing? We believe there is a way to positively realign that timing. Faster approval pathways. We are hearing speed, 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 speed. That's true for the state level, and that's true for the local level as well. One thing I will say, a lot of what local jurisdictions have to evaluate, a lot of the processes that we have, are governed by state requirements. And so we're happy to hear that the state is trying to get their house in order, but in order for us to, we need to have those two movements working together. And then there's some other ideas there. And then market tools, kind of what I said before, making sure that we have a community over here that might be able to take a little bit more burden, so can we release some of the tension over there to encourage the type of development we want to see. Mobilizing growth areas. So this is really important. There's a lot of talk about land use. There's a lot of talk about density. There's a lot of talk about, well, we said single family over here and mixed use over there. Local governments only play so much of a role. We are not market dictators. We still run under a free market. Free enterprise still decides where the high rises are going to go up, that have businesses, where the houses, et cetera. So just because we zone an area for development does not mean the free market automatically comes in there and zones that area. And we're seeing that more and more in Maryland and throughout the country. And so counties are asking for smarter tools to say, well, we're building the pipes towards this way. This is where density should be. The market's not going there for X reason. So how can we use our taxation authority, or how can we use tools to encourage the area where we're putting those investments? Sometimes the private sector has an onus to hold back investment, but that still has an externality, a big impact on the community, and they should recognize that. Additionally, limiting corporate house hoarding, it's a fact. Big money Wall Street sees housing as a way to make a big buck, and they are coming in, turning properties either into rentals, so they're taking away the equity that people can build up, or they're coming in and turning them into short-term rentals, et cetera. How can we limit that? Promoting home ownership, et cetera. And then finally, the last two, state actions, just making sure, again, if the local governments are getting their house in order, the state's getting its house in order, and then protecting renters. This is one item. We're just asking that if you're a landlord, submit information to the state so that if there's an issue, we can reach out and contact you. That's all it says. There's, across all 24 jurisdictions, we have cases where if there's an emergency or an issue, we cannot get in contact with the landlord to fix the most basic public health and safety issues. And we're powerless to do that. Part of affordable housing is growing the supply. Part of affordable housing is making sure that the supply we have is livable.
Yeah, and all of that highlights why flexibility for local governments is so crucially important. State laws that mandate local behavior, a one-size-fits-all just doesn't work. Both counties and municipalities are far too diverse in every possible way, geographically, demographically, et cetera, et cetera. So one-size-fits-all simply isn't workable for us. And you know, the National League of Cities actually conducted a study a few years ago at 50 states and 301 municipalities reported. Everybody said the same thing. Coordination among all stakeholders is the key here. Just like DHCD said, coordinated state efforts can work. But we need that flexibility to enable local governments to continue making the decisions on the ground that are best for the state and for our shared constituents.
So on a closing thought, I don't think anybody is surprised that the governor's bills are going to be really big this year. So there's going to be 3 major housing bills in addition to MAKO's Bambi. I want to kind of underline where counties are. I can't speak for MML, but where counties are right now. We have been talking with the governor's office. We have been talking with other stakeholder groups. We are committed to being part of the solution. We are in this community together. Compromise is waiting to happen. And we are having some very productive dialogue. And I'm hopeful by the hearing, if not soon after, we'll all be on the same page. That being said, it is also about balance. We are charged with the state, again, for managing infrastructure, for managing the environment, for managing all of this stuff. And while we do have to move the housing side forward, we either need clarity or need to balance the other stuff that we're charged with as well. So I have a feeling you're going to be seeing Angelica and I quite a bit this year, and we look forward to be in front of an ECM as much as we can.
Thank you. Are you done with your presentation?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll take questions. Delegate Ahrens.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming in. You know, I'm going to stay on the same thing I was on before. It's really great to hear a wish list of everything we want to do. I wish we would have seen these so-called bills first, because as you've heard here, it's not just building a house. It's the economics. It's the rate rules, regulations, what have you. I've had MDE come into my county and tell me that groundwater penetration is no longer acceptable. They've rescinded some of that, but these are big things in local areas. So all the stuff you're talking about, we've had affordable housing forever. We've tried to have affordable housing. Every housing plan that goes in of any size has to have a component of affordable housing. It's not worked. I'm wondering if these bills, which you probably have privy to, and all these ideas have anything that remotely can help that situation.
So if I can speak specifically.
You can speak whatever you want right now, because I asked a question, I think. With the speaker, I mean the chairman's blessing, I'm sorry.
So speaking specifically to rural Maryland, and to be actually very candid for a minute, there is not much either in the MAKO legislation or in the governor's bills that will solve the issues going on in rural Maryland. Rural Maryland needs infrastructure investment, flat out. Queen Anne's County right now is at their limit for wastewater treatment facilities. And for those of you that don't know, Queen Anne's County is the fastest growing county on the Eastern Shore. It's in the Baltimore region, right over the bridge, et cetera. They cannot take on any more development. That is not a decision that the voters made. That's not NIMBYs. That's the state of Maryland. That is MDE coming in and saying, you know, we can't work with you on the limits that we assign you. We can't work with you on new technology, or you need massive investment. But that's the state coming in and saying, you cannot permit any more new development because your infrastructure isn't getting there.
If I may just interrupt you, it is NIMBY also. Queen Anne's County, there's a major push. We don't want more growth over there. I do. I see growth as an advantage, but it is also that. That is a big component.
No, there's elements of that in every community. I'm talking about the state issue right now generally. And all across the Eastern Shore and Western Maryland as well, when we're getting into Washington County, out to Garrett County, infrastructure is holding back our rural communities. And we can pass as many bills as we want, but unless we're going to invest in that infrastructure, you're not going to see development outside of the urban core.
Well, again, you're dwelling on the easy things, but there's a whole lot more to having this. I mean, infrastructure is a big part of that. That's great. But you know what? There's also people being able to first afford it. People can't afford these homes. The cost of a home is not going to go down. If you make a smaller lot, people are going to look at that as an opportunity to make money. If it were financially acceptable and agreeable right now, if they could make money doing this, it would be being done. It's not being done because you cannot make it based on the rules, regulations. Look what we have to abide by salary, go right down the line, and it's prohibiting us from actually doing these things at an affordable price. The cost of living in Maryland is outrageous. That's not going to change once you decide to put these bills in place and say affordable housing. You're going to go after landlords, and you want to punish landlords for that, and they're the ones that are providing these homes right now. They're the ones out there taking that risk, and we're putting more and more restrictions on them. I don't think that's the answer. There has to be a better way to do this, but it's huge. It's not just a matter of the governor saying, I want this. It's so much bigger than that. Every department in the state's going to be affected by this. Thank you. Isn't that so?
So I'm told.
Yes, and.
Is that good, Delegate Ahrens?
I'm done, yeah.
Okay.
I said, isn't that so?
Okay. Delegate Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is probably very simple. Thank you for the presentation and thank you for your passion, but I'm just curious about the bill. When you are, I guess the bill addresses, with regard to the aspects of the landlords, what you're asking landlords to do, are you talking specifically about privately owned or properties that are receiving, vouchers, housing vouchers?
So the way it's structured in Bambi currently is that if you are a private individual and you have some type of corporation that owns a property, you have to register with the state once a year, and you just have to have some contact information for some individual that we can reach. It doesn't have to be the owner, it can be some type of representative, but those are really the only parameters. It doesn't require anything else, just once a year, give us information so that if there's a problem, we can contact you.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Chair. So yesterday we had the DLS give the briefing, and I'm going to start here. I was listening to you talk about infrastructure. One of the things that the governor is proposing is that we cut $70 million from the Bay Restoration Fund to balance this $1.4 billion budget. Now, I'm an Eastern Shore guy. I know what the Bay Restoration Fund is. I know how you use it. But I would ask you to, in your own words, say what would you have done with $70 million from the Bay Restoration Fund?
We would have done a lot. No, so that primarily goes into our wastewater treatment infrastructure, and so that gets into the question of what are we going to prioritize? If we're going to have certain requirements on development, then we need more money for infrastructure, or we need to relax some of those requirements and we're going to have a less clean bay.
So $70 million is a lot of money. I mean, that's an upgrade from a BNR to NR for a municipality. It's to help when we have failing septic systems, citizens being able to fix their septic systems. You know what a fix is on the Eastern Shore currently? It's putting holding tanks in. When I said to the Deputy Secretary that MDE is a problem, let me just say I was being polite. And the fact that the governor is not acknowledging that through the budget has to be fixed, is my 2 cents on that. Last year, we passed the solar mandate on rural counties. Now, let me just put it this way. We talk about housing, and again, I'm talking Eastern Shore. We can talk about Montgomery County. I'm versed in both. But, you know, we put solar up. We want to save trees. We want to do all these things. Isn't it up to the local counties how we should be developing property based on elected officials that are representing the citizens, both in the municipality and the counties? Tier mapping took that away for the most part. So as we're talking about solving housing, there was an incongruity when I was talking to the Deputy Secretary. I was talking about smaller lot sizes so we could build nice homes, 3-bedroom rancher on septic systems. And of course, when she's talking about lot sizes, she's not talking about septic systems. She's talking about hooking up to water and sewer. Well, I'm sorry, on the Eastern Shore, if we're not spending money improving the water and sewer systems through the Restoration Fund, how in the world can we be talking about expansion of housing opportunities from the Eastern Shore? That can be and isn't that so, and I'll move on to the next question, but I assume you might have some thoughts on the subject.
That is one of our concerns with the governor's housing package this year, and it's something that we've been in talks with the administration about, and we look forward to continuing those conversations.
The one thing I'll add to that is there's the idea that building smaller means building cheaper, and that's just fundamentally not true. And there's a great example from Montgomery County. There's actually several examples from Montgomery County where you would have a single family home. Montgomery County comes in, let's say they increase density, they change what the underlying zoning is. So you buy a single family home, let's say in a nice part of Montgomery for $800,000. If you can build 3 townhomes there, they're selling those each townhome $2 million each. So just because they're smaller and more dense, it's not equating to cheaper. And in some instances, the only way we can do that is with market tools.
Right. So my last question, Chair, and thank you for giving me the chance to get on the rail here. When you have rent control, now I'm a small producer of rental property. But when you talk about rent control, even talk about it, guess what I do? I stop. I'm not going to risk anything if I don't think I'm going to be able to balance the market to what it's going to cost me to develop property. What's worse, and I assume you're going to have some thoughts on this, is that if you're looking for expansion of housing opportunity, you can't possibly do this through the lens of slamming the producers through rent controls. Thoughts?
I think the entire thing's about balance. I think elected officials at all levels are hearing that and still evaluating it. It's just like everything in housing, it's a tough question, and there's not an easy answer. It's community by community.
Right. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for this panel? Seeing none, thank you very much. We will move on to the next panel. We have Maryland Building Industry Association, AOBA, and Maryland Multi-Housing Association. Lori Graff, Josh Wooldridge, Brian Anlou, Aaron Greenfield, and Gabrielle Duval. Just a gentle reminder, you have 20 minutes if you want to divvy that up however you like. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Lori Graff. I'm the CEO of the Maryland Building Industry Association, and thank you for having us here today. I'm going to be very brief. I just wanted to introduce myself. I will be in this committee a lot this year, I believe. Maryland Building Industry Association represents residential housing construction. Our members build single-family, multifamily. We also own rental properties. We also are suppliers within the market. We have about 1,000 members statewide, companies that do all sorts of housing-related products. Just to address a couple of things really quickly, if you have not read the housing report, I think we've mentioned it many times, I would strongly encourage you to do it. It's 78 pages, it's long. There is a Cliff Note version also online, so I would encourage you to read that. To Delegate Ampri's question about the regulations, it does address that. There's a lot of things. Dominic mentioned the Smith Island cake effect. Some projects go 20 different agencies before you can even get a permit. permit. So there's a lot of things there that you really need to just take a look at. Thank you. One other thing just to mention, and I know you guys are short on time, but we did do a briefing with Environment and Transportation on this issue in December. I'm sure you can get it online. It details a little bit more about the housing process. I'm happy to share that with anyone that may be interested in that as well. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Josh, who is actually a practitioner and can give a little bit more information about housing and maybe able to answer some of the questions that you guys have. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members. I'm going to go quick, so I certainly would welcome any questions afterwards. I'm honored to be here to provide testimony on behalf of the Maryland Building Industry Association and our 1,000 member organizations. We're an absolutely dedicated group of individuals and organizations determined to help Maryland address its housing shortages. My name is Josh Wooldridge, and I lead the development and construction efforts for the NRP group and our 60 employees, the majority of which are Maryland residents. Our Mid-Atlantic operations are based in Gaithersburg, Maryland, District 17 in Montgomery County. NRP is the third-ranked multifamily developer and builder nationwide based on annual new home production. And we're very unique, no other company like us, in that we build affordable workforce, market rate, and luxury, all at significant scale nationwide. I've had the unique honor of delivering nearly 4,000 multifamily units in the state of Maryland in districts 3, 15, 16, 18, 19, 20, 22, 25, 32, 33A, 46, and 47B. I'm working on my bingo card, about 25% of the way through. I thought I would cover 3 topics today. First, an example of the impact and benefits of one of our most recent Maryland projects. Second, an update on the effects of rent control on Montgomery and Prince George's County. And finally, an update on the capital market investor sentiment for Maryland ground-up housing development projects. Next slide, please. On this slide, you're looking at our most recent Maryland project known as the Logic at White Oak in District 20, walking distance to the White Oak Adventist Medical Center and a short bike or BRT ride to the FDA headquarters campus. On the right side of the slide, you see the before photo of what had become an obsolete data center, an eyesore, never had any visitors, activity, or eyes on the street. It sits right in the heart of an area that Montgomery County is desperately trying to redevelop. On the left is a photo of our final project. I trust you've seen other similar buildings like this as you've driven around the state. This is what we commonly refer to in the industry as a wrap, where the apartments surround and conceal a secured parking garage, and innovatively, this project only required 3 acres. Next slide, please. This project was the first new multifamily project delivered in eastern Montgomery County in over 40 years. 387 new homes accommodating 580 Marylanders. Not pictured is also 28 rental townhomes, which have turned out great for families. Project has 53 moderately priced dwelling units, priced at about 70% of the DC area median income. The prior use of this property generated $113,000 per year in property taxes alone. Upon stabilization, this asset will pay approximately 10 times that in property taxes. So a 10x increase. A typical Maryland project like this that you see in this photo brings the local municipality and state a package of approximately $10 million in impact permit, connection, transfer, and recordation fees. This project sought no public subsidy or investment. Contrast this with new affordable projects in Montgomery County, which are also sorely needed, but have required an 8-figure investment from taxpayers. You may be interested to learn that in Maryland, it's not uncommon that we're paying more fees and expenses to the government than a private landowner for the right to build on that property. Next slide, please. Next, I'd like to update you on the effects of rent control in Montgomery and Prince George's counties. As we all know, the 2 counties are home to 1/3 of Maryland's population, over 2 million residents. The 2 counties generate 40% of the state's GDP. I'm proud to say that we've recently completed our 9th project in those combined jurisdictions. Montgomery and Prince George's County have seen no new privately financed multifamily starts in 2024 or 2025. In addition, I know of maybe only 1 new project planning to start in 2026. The bottom line is we're looking at the first 3 projects post-rent control passage with almost no multifamily starts. Rent control wasn't the moral high ground that we were led to believe by local leadership. Short history lesson. For the past 30 years, Montgomery and Prince George's counties consistently averaged 10 privately financed new multifamily project starts per year, equating to 3,600 new units, housing approximately 5,400 Marylanders and brand new supply. And in most cases in those two jurisdictions, they were in close proximity to a majority of the state's largest employers, infrastructure, and mass transit. During that same period, the private sector persevered through a tech bubble burst, September 11th attacks, the great financial crisis, material shortages, material cost spikes, numerous federal government shutdowns, local moratoria, a pandemic, and tariffs. Regrettably, only rent control has managed to completely decimate new multifamily housing supply. It's no longer an obtuse concept in some faraway place like Oregon, St. Paul, or New York City. Maryland's largest jurisdictions are now a cautionary tale for the rest of the country. So what have we collectively lost by not getting our customary 10 new projects per year in those two counties? I've added up the numbers. These are for 1 year, and you could certainly see how that would compound over 3 years. $150 million in planned permit impact and connection fees, $225 million in transfer and recordation taxes. I took this figure directly from the county's respective operating budgets, before rent control and after. Buying and selling of institutional-grade Maryland real property assets has completely ended. A reliable local and state funding source essentially gone overnight. $30 million in annual construction materials sales taxes, and I think that's incredibly important for the state budget. Over $14 million in annual recurring property taxes, and in the case of Montgomery County, 315 new moderately priced dwelling units per year. As if that wasn't devastating enough, average rents in 2025, which are down significantly, virtually all over the country due to 2022 and 2023 record supply that was delivered throughout the country, rents decreased 1.7% in nearby Northern Virginia for all multifamily units, but actually increased in 2025 0.2% in suburban Maryland. The trend is even worse when looking at our NOAA, our naturally occurring affordable housing and workforce units. 2025 rents were down 2.1% in Virginia, but up 1.5% in Maryland. When studying entire rental markets, that's a 3.6% swing, and that's massive when comparing the two markets. The Northern Virginia renter is in much better shape than the suburban Maryland renter. If you've built new multifamily supply, rents have plummeted. Renters are currently reaping the rewards. Sunbelt and Texas markets are offering as much as 3 to 4 months free right now and 1 year's lease to entice tenants. Finally, I'd like to update you on the investment capital market sentiment for Maryland. I think one of the most common misconceptions is that new housing supply is created by local wealthy families, high net worth individuals, or even by large publicly traded companies. That was the model throughout the last century, but has long since disappeared. New housing supply is created by a vast array of private enterprises. Due to the high cost to build in the Mid-Atlantic or Northeast, not singling out Maryland here, we as a developer have to convince investors from around the world to come here and make a $40 to $50 million equity investment in what has to be a really large lending institution capable of making a $60 to $80 million construction loan. Therefore, investor sentiment is absolutely everything in our world. Ironically, you might be surprised to learn that the majority of multifamily equity investment actually comes from state public employee or state teacher pension funds or other retirement funds or even life insurance companies. Coincidentally, this week was the National Multi-Housing Council's national meeting in Las Vegas. As is customary, NRP met with 50 of the largest equity investors in the world, and preemptively before we arrived, those investors said, hey, don't bring your Maryland stuff. We'll talk about Northern Virginia, but don't bring Maryland projects. They don't see the return on investment as worth the risk profile of our regulatory environment. The corollary for me is, would we recruit AstraZeneca or a quantum computing company here only to tell them that after a certain amount of time, free market fundamentals will no longer apply to their investments, that they can't raise prices to what the market will bear? It sounds absurd, right? So why would we do the same thing with a 9-figure market rate housing investment? In Maryland, hope to answer some of the previous questions, our local municipalities treat new housing projects as an extraction mechanism. It's the system that I'm used to, I've played by for my entire career, but other states just don't view housing through that lens. In closing, I'd ask you to remember that this session, when MBIA members experience success, our population also gets housed. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Brian Anley with the Apartment and Office Building Association of Metro Washington. And I'm going to go very fast so I can make sure the other speakers get their time allotment. AOBA represents the owners and operators of 133,000 apartment units and 23 million square feet of commercial office space in Montgomery and Prince George's counties. I like to say if you see a tall building in Montgomery, Prince George's, the district, or Northern Virginia, it's probably one of ours unless they're a bad actor. No, kidding. So on the slide, you can see the economic benefit of AOBA member companies, including a combined 300,000 jobs supported and $70 billion in local contributions. Next slide, please. The point of this slide is really to point out that over the last 5 years, the General Assembly has passed dozens of laws regulating the housing industry. And as you'll see in a moment, those laws have an impact. There are trade-offs. In addition to state laws, local governments like Montgomery and Prince George's have passed some of their own. You've heard a lot about rent control, but nearly a dozen more. I was hoping to have, next slide, Dr. Issy Romim from Metro site virtually, but he couldn't make the change date. So I'll do my best to channel him. If I can't answer any questions, I'll be sure to pass them along to Dr. Romim to help answer them. But what you see here on the screen is a study that Metro site did that looked at ACS census data and CoStar data and tried to quantify the cumulative impact of housing regulations on housing affordability. And really the takeaway there is that while many of these policies seemed well-intentioned and are intended to protect renters, what they ultimately do is they raise operating costs and risk for housing providers, which in turn can raise housing costs for tenants by as much as 9%. Again, happy to try and answer any questions about the study specifics, but the main takeaway is that regulations raise costs, and when you don't expand supply, as Josh mentioned, it'll only worsen the rent burden on tenants. There are additional charts and data in the appendix that I won't touch on at this point, but happy to try and answer any questions on those as well. They mostly touch on a lot of what you've heard of today on the impacts of new supply on housing affordability at different levels of the market. And with that, I thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to working with each of you to make housing more affordable this session.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Aaron Greenfield here. Thank you. Here on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association, like Lori and Brian, you'll see a lot of me, which I'm looking forward to working with this new committee. MMHA is a professional trade association established in 1996, representing owners and managers who house more than 558,000 Marylanders. MMHA's membership includes operators of more than 214,000 rental homes across more than 1,015 apartment communities. Some data on the economic impact of our members and their communities include $34.76 billion contributed to the metro economy in renovation, repair, operations, and resident spending, $4.76 billion impact from tax revenue, and 151,147 jobs supported by apartment construction, operations, and resident spending as well. One message, because I'm going to be brief, because I really want you to hear from Gabrielle Duvall, the President and CEO of Southern Management. One message I want to leave the committee with is, as Josh mentioned, is to focus on naturally occurring affordable housing. The voluminous additional laws that this body and local jurisdictions pass, which we have a slide in the packet that reflects that, makes expenses increase, which leads to higher rents and decreases affordability. With that, Madam Chair, if I could turn it over to Gabrielle Duvall.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for having us today. Southern Management Companies houses over 40,000 people in 22,000 apartments in the state of Maryland. We pay $39 million annually in state, local, and real estate taxes. We employ over 900 Marylanders and pay almost $90 million a year in wages and benefits. We also support our local vendors and suppliers with over $100 million in annual operational and capital spending. In other words, we are a significant part of Maryland's economic infrastructure. Importantly, over 65% of Southern Management's apartment homes sit at under 60% of AMI. So we are a major provider of workforce housing throughout this state. We are the people that house your missing middle class, your postal workers, your nurses, your teachers, your police officers. And we believe in long-term housing through rental communities and opportunities. We just celebrated in 2025 4 separate residents that have lived in a Southern Management apartment home for over 50 years. We do believe rental housing can be a safe and affordable long-term solution. And yet our expenses continue to rise for housing providers like ourselves at levels far in excess of market growth. Operating expenses for the portfolio have grown annually on an average of 4.92% since 2020, for a cumulative increase of over 20% in cost over 5 years, far outpacing the rate of inflation. We heard a little bit today from Brian and Aaron and others about the onslaught of overregulation impacting our industry. These laws, both at the local and state level, directly impact the cost to run our communities and directly impact our bottom line. However, ultimately, it doesn't just impact our bottom line, it impacts yours. It directly impacts Maryland's revenue stream. Since 2023, Southern Management has successfully appealed 38 community tax assessments. Our tax assessed values dropped by $703 million since 2023. Since COVID, since these regulations, resulting in a loss directly of $10.4 million in tax revenue to the state of Maryland between 2023 and 2027. That is a significant amount of money for all of us. We are all in this together to find the right solutions. The drop in values is significant, and the assessors got there by looking at a variety of factors. Higher capitalization rates, like you heard from Josh, caused by the fleeing of capital out of Maryland. Our decreased NOI, our net operating income, increase in expenses, lower operating margins, all of which are trending to lower profitability. This drop in values is directly related to the legislative environment we are facing in Maryland. It makes it harder to evict non-paying residents, makes it harder to enforce our leases. It increases our operating expenses. The imposition of rent control and vacancy control has impacted 16,000 of our units in Maryland. Our increase in property taxes, despite our successful appeals, is significant. These decisions matter. Making it harder to operate our business in this state matters. In the past 5 years, Southern Management has commenced 2 development projects and 1 new acquisition. We had to weigh our options and make our business decisions based in part heavily on the regulatory environment, which is why all 3 of those new projects are in Virginia, not in Maryland. These projects employ hundreds of people, bring millions of dollars of revenue into the state, and do not require a single dollar of incentive, tax deferral, or any contribution from the state in return for building them. Maryland has had our heart and our history for our 61 years in existence, but Virginia is grabbing our minds, presenting future opportunities, and is where we were forced to place our new investments. Rent stabilization, vacancy control, building energy performance standards, the requirement to retrofit old buildings to meet current fire code, these are all driving us down the road, over the bridge, and into another jurisdiction. Help us to see the same opportunities in Maryland. We want to be part of the affordable housing solution. We want to be part of Maryland's future. We don't want to exclusively have to look to other states for what we want to do. To sum this up, when everything becomes a priority, nothing becomes a priority. The amount of inconsistent and constant legislation plaguing our industry from different local jurisdictions as well as the state, and trying to legislatively solve for every single anecdotal perceived tenant concern, environmental concern, social justice concern, is taking us further and further away from preserving, protecting, and advancing affordable housing solutions in Maryland. Please help us to find clarity and solutions that support our aging, middle-class workforce communities and allow us to continue housing our Marylanders that need it the most. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Duval. I'll just start by saying I just wanted to make a comment to Mr. Wooldridge, Josh.
Yeah.
Nice touch adding Vice Chair Charcuti's district in your little PowerPoint presentation here.
I promise you it's our most recent project.
With that said, I just had a question for Ms. Duval, and I hope my questions make sense. So I noticed on your sheet here, 61 years in business, 100%, 22,000 residential apartments over 23 legislative districts. So I know you are in my district, in Legislative District 26 in Prince George's County. What I don't know is how many properties do you have And do you know?
I don't know specifically in your district. I do know we have 28 separate properties in Prince George's County that house 12,000 apartment homes.
Okay. You also mentioned for us to please help you because with all the regulations in the state, it would be I would assume that you would understand that the regs that have been implemented before we even got housing and land use and zoning was for the benefits of our residents and our constituents, right? And I know there's a balance that we need to work between you and the constituents. With that said, would you say that due to the many regulations, would you say, and I'm talking about just you, Southern Management, your business, since you're the president, would you say it's increasing or decreasing as far as your business is concerned? I'll start with that.
The amount of regulation is increasing, and the pressure it feels on our business is incredibly increasing. It is a confluence of both state and local jurisdictions. And while I know you guys are the state and that's all you're here to do, and I appreciate that, it's important that we recognize that the empowerment of the local jurisdictions directly impacts. And what happens is when we legislate anecdotally at the local or the state level, we wind up sometimes with duplicative and conflicting provisions. We have rent control over 16,000 of our units subject to 3 different jurisdictions and 3 different bills and 3 different regulations that support that. When we talk about renter protections, we have statewide renter safety acts, we have statewide filing fees, we also have local inspection regimes we are forced to live with. When we talk about licensing, we have local licensing requirements and state mandates of what we should be regulated to. It becomes almost akin, I would say, to having to have a driver's license, a road license, and a vehicle license to move your car every day.
I understand. Would you say that these regs are affecting your particular business one way? I mean, I know it's, you described it as affecting you, I forget what word you used, majorly, I'm making that word up. But is your business in, do you feel like your business would be not in business, for lack of a better way of describing it, because of all these regs? I know that seems like a simplistic question, but the way you were explaining your testimony, I was just curious if that was.
What I will say is it's making us make different choices to sustain our business. We employ
in the state of Maryland.
In the state of, right, we employ over 1,300 people. We want to keep our business going. What we're doing is we're looking at new opportunities in Virginia because we can't afford those same opportunities in Maryland. We looked at 2 different sites for what we call our Cavalier Club project in Northern Virginia. Cavalier Club project is a perfect example of what you should want in Maryland. We're keeping an existing workforce building of 9 stories and 236 units. We're building 4 sale townhomes on one side, a new multifamily property on the other side, a garage for the existing resident building from the surface parking we're taking. We're giving them a new lobby, vestibule, and new amenities without raising their rents to try to entice them to stay through the construction, and a new multifamily building. We're creating a neighborhood while we're protecting and avoiding gentrification of the existing product. We looked at 2 different sites, both in Montgomery County, to do the exact same project. And because of the regulatory regime in Montgomery County, because Southern Management is a long-term holder, we have sold 1 residential property since our inception. We had buyer's remorse and brought it back. So when I say long-term holder, we are the definition of that. We have to look beyond the immediate building of a project. We have to look at how we operate it for the periods to come. The rolling exemption in Montgomery County of, I think it's 23 years to build, means it's very hard to develop a project of the size and scope we're doing in Virginia and see that longevity being a profitable function for us. So we are making the different choices. We're not making the choices to go out of business. We're making the choices to navigate around what makes Maryland very difficult for us to operate our business in.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Ampry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all so much for this presentation. I also see that District 40 is missing from this list here, Mr. Woolridge. We got to work on that.
Yes.
But 46 get all the love, man. We need the 40th district needs some love in Baltimore on the housing front, but that's a conversation for another day. But you know, I understand the frustration that you all present here, and I just, you know, the thing that I want to make sure that we're using is just as much data as possible, right? So I appreciate the data on how you all think about how you invest. I appreciate the data on the decisions that you are making between where you plan to put housing. Just want to get an idea, just data point wise, you have a list of bills here on, this is slide, I guess there's no number slide, but the housing is heavily regulated slide. You have a list of bills here that have been passed at the state level and the local level that I guess you are suggesting that have impeded on your ability to grow and develop more housing options. It's just it's a long list here. Is there any way you can kind of describe like which of these are have provided the highest pressure points to you all not being able to build, and give specific reasons as to why? Because I think at the end of the day, I think that there's a world where everything can be balanced, right? We want to make sure tenants have the protection that they need. And, I think there's a world where we can sit here and figure out, hey, maybe some of these things we can tweak a bit to make your numbers work, but make sure that the tenants are still going to be made whole. Just to have this listed here doesn't give me a better, fine tooth comb version of what is at issue here. So I kind of want to hear the data point as like, what of these bills has been the most impacting on your ability to be able to build in Maryland?
I can take the first stab at that question, Delegate. Firstly, I put the list together, and really what that's the message supposed to get across is that it's already a heavily regulated industry, and there's a lot of these things that I think they sound good in isolation, but when taken together, they really have a detrimental impact on the housing industry and its ability to operate, as Gabrielle and Josh mentioned. But more directly to your question, probably the biggest impacts are rent stabilization, rent control in both Montgomery and Prince George's counties, as you've heard about today. It is a 23-year rolling exemption in Montgomery. I can't put enough of a fine point on that, in that over time, every single building that is built in Montgomery County will become rent controlled. And so that is what is driving away investors, like you heard from Josh when he was at a national housing conference and saying, don't bring projects in Maryland. It's because of, over time that will be phased in. And then there's additional uncertainty in Prince George's County, for example, that even though they have a fixed date exemption of January 2000, that exemption could be moved. There have been several bills since that became law that would move it. Beyond that, things like BEPS, you heard Gabrielle mention a little bit about BEPS and really the significant investment that has on the housing industry. We last year presented to the ECM Committee, and we're happy to share it with anyone else on this committee that is interested on the impacts that BEPS would have on housing affordability. And we've sort of taken a pause this year on the BEPS issue, but that will be back next year to sort of help work through. But those are probably the two biggest on there. And then things that really delay evictions or help try to prevent evictions for like rent delinquencies, for example. There's a good case study at the very end of the appendix of DC that is actually putting affordable housing providers in DC out of business because their delinquency rates have gotten so high and they can't evict these tenants that nearly half of essentially their client base is not paying rent on time, and no business is sustainable when that is the case. And so I think, again, we want to keep people housed. That is the point of Josh and Gabrielle's business. But when you create barriers to prevent delinquency and recovery of those delinquency amounts, really it puts a strain on the business's operations. So with that, I'll cede.
I guess quick follow-up question to that. So thank you for breaking that down. It's really helpful. I guess my follow-up question is, I know other states and localities have these similar laws. Is no one building there? So like, is New York City not seeing building? I feel like every time I'm in New York, I see skyscrapers, something being built. LA, I mean, I know these places have similar laws. Are they also just not building?
I can't speak to New York specifically, but I can tell you because I follow on social media our New York affiliate, and they are always posting about the hundreds of thousands of units that are sitting vacant in New York because they cannot be brought up to code, because they simply cannot recoup their investment from the rent levels. So even with all the tall buildings and all of that, there is still a housing supply and demand issue. And you'll see in the appendix that the markets, you heard a little bit about some of the Texas markets, but there's others. It's not just unique to Texas. There's others where supply is the highest and new supply is coming online. And that's, as you heard, no surprise in economics, it's driving the prices down, or it's helping to stabilize the prices. And so, yes, generally the places that you're seeing that new supply come online, it's places that are not as heavily regulated. And because AOBA is in Virginia, I can tell you Virginia does not have BEPS. Virginia does not have rent control. They just defeated a statewide rent control enabling bill in my counterpart. Thankfully, we're not graded on a curve at AOBA. So my counterpart in Virginia just defeated that bill. So I hope that answers your question.
If I could just add one other bill to note is House Bill 693, the Renters' Rights Act, which was the governor's bill in 2024. It really did two things that I think placed us as an outlier. One is well, I wouldn't say that. What it did is it increased the failure to pay rent filings from $8 to something like $60 or $80 a filing, and you were not permitted to collect that from the non-prevailing party. So it's very explicit. It did that. So even if you prevailed in a failure to pay rent action and the tenant is responsible and you get a judgment for possession, you couldn't pass along those costs.
So you can't recoup, okay.
You can't recoup it, you can recoup it through the security deposit. Very strange. That did one sort of piece of damage. The other thing it did is it eliminated what Maryland had, which was a double security deposit allowance, which allowed our members, particularly in the NOAA housing market, to charge a double security deposit to qualify applicants who were risky. So it was common, and we've done internal surveys that demonstrate that a significant number of our members do not qualify applicants as a result of that elimination.
Okay. Very helpful. I know we're going to have more conversations offline, but I know that at the end of the day, I think we have the ability, to strike a balance, right? There has to be a balance between all this and finding a way to make sure that we get more supply online, but also making sure that, as the Vice Chair mentioned earlier, that, we're making sure that those who are currently living here are not, getting taken advantage of.
Delegate, if I may just address one thing. You asked the question about other jurisdictions with rent control.
Yeah.
What I will say is rent control runs a gamut of about 1 million miles from one degree to another. And I'm not an expert in other jurisdictions. I don't want to give you misinformation about New York. We can certainly follow up. We all did follow I'm sure, as you all did too, what happened in St. Paul and the disastrous that their stringent rent control bill was. Montgomery County and Prince George's County have been identified by the Wall Street Journal and others as two of the most stringent rent control laws in the country because, in part, Montgomery County's rolling exemption. The second biggest concern with both of those is vacancy control. And vacancy control is not a part of the other bills, and it is a game changer economically for us in a negative way without benefiting our residents. And if you'd like to hear more about it, fine, I just don't want to usurp your time, but that is why we see a difference.
I know, look, with my new role, I'm going to see y'all all the time. We'll be in conversation.
Madam Chair, if I could just define vacancy control for the committee, that's where they're not, the amount of rent that can be charged is not just limited to the existing tenant. In other words, it's not just protecting the tenant that is in place at that time. The rent controls affect the unit itself. That means that if the tenant becomes vacant for any reason, whether it's delinquency, breach of lease, or the tenant just decides to move out on their own, the next tenant that comes in, their rent is also capped. So it's not about just protecting existing tenants and keeping them in place. It is a poor solution for housing affordability when the solution for housing affordability is building more housing.
Thank you. That was going to be my question, so I appreciate that. Delegate Adams?
Thank you, Chair. So, I'll start with the vacancy control thing. So either of you can answer so what happens when there's a vacancy and the tenant destroys the unit? And look, it's not unusual, I would think, to have somebody spend $10,000, $12,000, $20,000 to repair a unit. And so you're saying under vacancy control, okay, fine, to make it rentable, you've got to bring it back, but you're not allowed to recover the costs in any way, shape, or form?
Delegate, thank you for that question. That's exactly right. Vacancy control is championed as preventing landlords in rent control district from unceremoniously refusing to renew a lease so that a tenant can drive up rents to a higher market and make more money. But that's false. That's not how our business works. Housing providers make the most profit from residents who stay in place and pay their rent. That is goal number one. We would rather have a tenancy of 20 years than a tenancy of 5 months. It is better for us, more cost effective. It's not purely altruistic, although it does help the resident as well. But for example, to your exact question, our turnover costs have exploded post-COVID. For long-term and/or delinquent residents, turnover costs have increased in my portfolio from an average of $5,000 a unit to upwards of $20,000 a unit because of the conditions. Those happen in two different cases, where you have a delinquent resident, they treat your apartment poorly, they trash it on the way out. Southern Management also prides itself on long-term renters, as you've heard. When someone's lived in the apartment for 35 years and then they leave to go to a nursing home, assisted living, to move in with their family, the apartment has 35 years of age on it because they've let us in to do some work, not to gut the apartment while they lived there. If you assume $20,000 a turn, we would have to increase rents by $1,200 a month to recapture that cost in a single-year lease, which the market clearly doesn't support. Just as a way of information, Southern Management's average rent, monthly average rent across our portfolio in Maryland and Virginia is $1,616 a month. We can't increase rents to by $1,200 a month to get paid back on a turn. So you can see that economically, the increases within the market are much lower than the cost we can even recoup at a turnover. We don't want to turn people out of our apartments. Also, we've always prided ourselves on being second chance housing for our tenants. We offer credit counseling, resident financial services, and we've even offered 3-month conditional leases to those who do not meet our qualification requirements. It is a stop before homelessness is what we're trying to do. Under vacancy control, however, we may only raise rents once in a calendar year, despite how many new tenants we bring in. So because of the turnover costs and the increased risk, we've had to forego our 3-month conditional program, which impacts hundreds of Marylanders who don't otherwise qualify for housing. Lastly, vacancy control is an extraordinarily expensive and damaging remedy to an unfounded fear. The inability to allow us to take an apartment that has been leased for 20 years and bring it back up to market, because every year we renew a resident, we're not taking them up to market, we're giving cost of living renewals, can result in enormous losses, not just to income, but also to the valuation I spoke of earlier and to our ability to refinance. Lenders want us to be able to bring our vacant units to market. They don't like these long-term caps. They are negatively impacting our business model. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, well, vacancy control sounds worse than rent control in some respects.
I don't like to say anything's worse than rent control, but you might be right.
So, you know, Aaron, on the House floor, we've had just cause or good cause eviction. Those bills have in the past passed out of the House of Delegates, and the Senate has historically stopped the bills. But now that I mean, like, this is our committee now, and I think hopefully I'll have some more engagement on the subject rather than just a floor debate. But just, can you walk through for me sort of the politics of that
Yeah, I can, you know, Gabrielle can speak to the practical effect of it. I can speak to the politics of it.
Yeah.
So that's a bill that has passed this House. It has gone over to the Senate, and the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee has worked with, I think, both sides. And one side has asked, which is our side, which has asked for an amendment that makes clear that that you can't have both just cause eviction and vacancy control. So local jurisdictions have an option of one or the other. You can have rent control with vacancy control, or you can have just cause eviction. We think that is the best way to preserve it. I think the Senate agrees with our position, and that's where it's getting hung up, because the advocates on the other side, and they'll speak for themselves, but they've traditionally been against having that amendment in the just cause eviction legislation.
Yeah. I mean, so I have some experience with what's called good cause eviction. So they've used different terminologies, but the point is, if you're a federally funded, like HUD, project, because you're using federal dollars to pay the rents, they have a tendency to say, well, we're going to have additional protections for evictions. And where I bristle, and I've said it on the House floor, is that it's one thing if you've got a federally funded project and, okay, you're taking federal dollars and this is how we're going to limit, the eviction system. They're trying to apply it in the private sector, completely different business model, completely different economics. And I get frustrated because it feels like it came up during COVID. Like when COVID came around, I was going to save this for the part, but I'll just say it here. The life before COVID, when it came to landlord-tenant, was more, you've got a contract. It's a two-party contract, the landlord and the tenant. And when there's violations of the contract, you go to court. But as a rule of thumb, it's if you paid your rent, you get to stay. If you don't pay your rent, you're going to end up losing your house. And during COVID, the world, it changed, right? I mean, we allowed people to live in their homes without having to actually pay the rent. And of course, the government helped landlords in this respect in the short term. But now we're through it. But what's remained is this general principle that is being, the landlord is being burdened with the ongoing principle that, you know, that these responsibilities under a very simply written and understood contract, we're shifting the burden away from the tenant to do their part. And we're shifting it all toward the landlord. And I would just ask, do you think I'm right on the subject? And do you think that's what the politics of this is that we're sitting here today trying to breathe life into something that happened 4 or 5 years ago to protect people, and all of a sudden it sounded palatable. Now we're going to make it permanent. And just your thoughts.
Delegate, if I may, I have two responses to you. The first thing is you're spot on in that we're trying to make housing a public-private partnership where all the burden is on the private party. And that is a real problem in our industry without public dollars to support it. The second thing is I go back to something I said earlier today, which is, are we solving for the right problem? Are we solving a statewide problem, or are we solving an anecdotal problem because someone called someone's office and said I was unceremoniously evicted from my house? And I say that because out of our 22,000 apartment homes in Maryland in 2025, we issued only 129 management notices and filed only 14 tenant holding over actions. If you do the math, is that really a problem rising to state level regulation? Thank you.
Are you done, Delegate Adams? Thank you. You're welcome. No, I get it. I was going to call him next, but he stepped out for a moment. So Delegate Sharkoudian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think, I have a lot of questions. I think I just want to say a couple things for the record and then invite the conversation to continue just because of the time. And specifically, I do feel like I need to say for the record that when I've analyzed the numbers for Montgomery County in particular, the last 10 years, there's almost a question of if the rent stabilization law does anything to protect renters. And I say that because actually the rent stabilization law limits rent at a number that is higher than what the market would have and did produce. And then if you run those same numbers and you add vacancy control of 10%, you have for the vast majority average turnover, no difference in what landlords have the ability to charge. So I understand that your position generally is that you prefer not to have regulations. But I just think there is going to be this ongoing conversation that we're going to have, and Delegate Ampre's point about, like, we welcome the dialogue and there's got to be a balance. We definitely want new buildings built, but we also can't have tenants who don't have the stability in their homes, because those kinds of things affect our education. Like tenants who are constantly having to move makes our education more expensive, because the chaos in those kids' lives makes them harder to educate. And so there are implications that sort of go all the way around. And I want to make sure that when we're talking about data, that we're looking at all of the data. So that's not really a question, and I think if I start asking questions and engaging, we'll probably be here all night. I won't do that to my colleagues, but I do feel the need to sort of say those things for the record, and also just say I look forward to continuing the conversation with all of you.
Thank you. And our last question for this panel is Delegate Bhandari.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at your very fancy slide, regulatory impacts on housing affordability. Like your slide shows a correlation rather than the proof of cause with respect to all these researcher. There might be other factors also at play, like higher operating cost, or then housing supply shortage and local market pressure, and when and where these laws were applied. I think that is missing there on the slide. And to be specific here, this chart shows that when all 4 renter protections policies are combined, rent increase by roughly 8 to 9%, with eviction-related policies having the largest individual impact. From a policy standpoint, we have a responsibility to help our vulnerable citizens as well. How do we protect tenants and prevent displacement without unintentionally driving up rents? And what adjustment would you recommend so these protection improve both affordability rather than, undermining it?
So I can take that question, and I'm glad you asked that, Delegate. So to the correlation versus causation question, the authors of the study, they did extensive robustness checks, if you will. They looked at large metro areas only, which tend to have a lot of, as you just saw, landlord-tenant regulations. They looked at pre-COVID years. They looked at sort of differences in, the politics of each jurisdiction, and the results did not change. They also sort of tested for before and after the laws are enacted. They were really trying to isolate what is the impact of the enactment of each of those laws on the cost of rent, and that's how they arrived at those numbers. And so, is this the case in every single jurisdiction and in every single case that creating eviction prevention measures is going to increase rent by 5.89%? No, that's probably not the case. But the point that I think the study is trying to get across, and that I'm certainly trying to get across, is that when you create those eviction prevention measures, it's kind of like a balloon. You're squeezing on one end and you're making the balloon bigger on the other end. And what I mean by that analogy is that you're making it more difficult for the landlord to recover, or really to get the rents in, which is what they need to operate. And so the direct answer to your question of what do you do, because you obviously want to make sure that the renters stay in their home, is eviction prevention resources, right? We saw a lot of that come through during the COVID pandemic, where there was a lot of federal monies that came in that went towards helping keep people in their homes. That's one way. Now, I understand that the state is obviously in a very difficult budget situation, and it's limited in its ability to do that. But I think if, one of the takeaways that you have here is that if you create a regulatory environment where you have people like Josh investing in building in the county and raising and not foregoing those revenues that you would have gotten, it helps raise all boats. It helps provide those resources that you then need to prevent eviction for those tenants that you want to keep in place.
If Madam Chair, if the research exists, would love to see the new slide or new data, whatever it shows, with those variables. When you put those variables, and if you run this data, how it looks. So I would be interested to see that.
Yeah, I'm happy to get you the full report, and I'm also happy to try, to the extent that you have time during session. I know it's obviously very busy, trying to arrange a meeting for you and anyone else on the committee that is interested in meeting with Dr. Romem. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. There are no more questions. Thank you so much to this panel for presenting before us. Colleagues, we're going to move on to our last panel. We have the advocacy groups, our advocates with Renters United Maryland, Zafar Shah, David Wheaton, Lisa Saro, and Jacob Meck.
Close, Kamich.
Kamich. You may begin whenever you're ready. And just a gentle reminder to speak directly into the microphone, please. Somebody begin.
Yeah, I'm just setting up
Oh, yeah,
the slide.
thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay, Chair Valderrama, members of the committee, my name is Zafar Shah, an advocacy director for the Human Right to Housing at Maryland Legal Aid, and I'm pleased to kick off our last panel from Renters United Maryland. Renters United is a coalition established in 2018 to bring the perspective of Maryland renters and the values of housing stability and housing justice into focus each year at the General Assembly session. As you heard, Maryland has a shortage of 275,000 units affordable for renters earning 80% or less of area median income, but 47% of that shortage are for the households that are earning 30% AMI or less. Our challenges for especially that part of the renter community aren't limited to units and permits and starts and widgets. To quote the tenant organizer Tracy Rosenthal, housing isn't in crisis, tenants are. Their lives are wrecked and wrung by price gouging, eviction, and displacement. They suffer trauma, loss, precarity, panic, poor health, and premature death. For poor and working class people, particularly people of color, this crisis is permanent. Our goal at Renters United is that the crisis should be impermanent and should end. As you heard from DHCD, more than half of renter households in Maryland are cost burdened. That cost burden impacts most of the state, not just concentrated in the metro areas of Baltimore, but also in DC, but also almost the entire Eastern Shore. In general, housing cost burden has statistically significant association with material hardship, meaning food insecurity, the inability to afford medical care, other basic needs, impeding child development. These are all costs of housing cost burden and ultimately costs of eviction, which are externalized from that private landlord-tenant relationship to the public. I wanted to highlight this map that you see here. No county in Maryland can a worker earning the average renter wage afford a one-bedroom apartment at fair market rent working 40 hours per week. That renter has to work 76 hours per week in Prince George's County, 87 hours per week in Frederick, 97 hours in Charles. But the average amount of hours for a Maryland worker per week is just 33.6 hours. The income to rent gap is increasing in Maryland for that one bedroom fair market apartment. It's $10.93, the difference between how much a person earns and how much they would have to earn to afford that apartment. It's increased even more in the Washington, D.C. suburb area, $16.33. And as you can see in this chart, much of that rise is due to increases that occurred after Montgomery County legislated its rent stabilization ordinance. So there's a lot of narrative, you've heard some of it today, about the layers of regulation that to stabilize all the work that you've done over the past 5 years to stabilize renters layered on top of local ordinances is impeding housing production. This is meant to sound like the analysis that many developers in DHCD have articulated, that we have too much well-intended restrictions on land use, zoning, environmental restrictions, multiple reviews, impact fees, but none of those things is actually like a tenant protection. So our position is that tenant protections are not the type of regulation that DHCD is talking about. And there's a conflation going on. So I've provided you a list of the tenant protections that the legislature has passed since 2010. There have been 31 bills, over 20 since 2021. And to characterize those, you see 11 bills that focus just on the eviction process, 6 bills that focus on opportunities in the market for housing, 7 about fairness, for instance, codifying tools to allow tenants to hold landlords accountable for things that they're already supposed to be doing, like the Mold Tenant Protection Act last session, and then 7 bills that are simply about governance and funding for programs. So there is no evidence that, for instance, good cause eviction empirically impedes production. And we had that testimony from researchers last session. Similarly, for rent stabilization, there is no study that shows that the kind of rent stabilization passed in Montgomery County and Prince George's County which allow for over 20 years of exemption for new buildings, has the kind of effect that the landlords and developers claim they have to impede production. When you look at the permitting for key metro area DC suburbs, the permitting may have dropped after rent stabilization was passed, but when you look at the time of 2010 to 2025, you'll notice that there have always been peaks and valleys. There are cycles to development, and you can't just look at 2024 and 2025 in isolation, and it's virtually impossible to isolate one policy or one factor as a reason for a dip. In fact, when we look at the top producers of affordable housing in the country over the past 4 years, you see that Seattle, which has rent stabilization, good cause eviction, and many other tenant protections, leads the country. And at the top 10 of these markets have good cause eviction in place. All the work that you've done is having positive impact. I want to make sure you take that away from today. Over the past 4 years, you've had quote unquote layers of tenant protections, like the access to counsel and evictions law, new notice requirements for tenants, rental assistance, rental licensing proof in eviction proceedings, the filing fee surcharge that was mentioned. You've achieved a 37% reduction in failure to pay rent evictions since 2020. But there's a lot more work to do. As you can see in the bottom corner here, there are 43.7 eviction filings per 100 renter households as of 2025. So I'll pass it on to my colleague, David, to continue this panel.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is David Wheaton. I am Policy Counsel with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Just a brief history about LDF. We were founded by Maryland's own Thurgood Marshall in 1940, and LDF is the nation's oldest racial law organization in the country. We work on litigation policy, community organizing, communications, and research to improve the lives of Black communities across our 4 pillars: economic justice, political participation, criminal justice, and educational equity. I'm going to talk about just, 2 main things. One is just the racial justice impacts of evictions in Maryland, and then also talk about what's been going on at the federal level with the current administration when it comes to fair housing laws. First, evictions disproportionately hurt Black families in Maryland. Black households have the highest eviction removal count in Maryland, almost 3 times higher than the eviction rate for white residents, and households headed by Black women had the highest number of eviction removals in Maryland. And so when we're talking about evictions, we want to put a face, and so we also want to ensure that folks know that this does have a disproportionate impact on our Black communities. And just the next slide is a mapping that shows kind of where the evictions are disproportionately segregated in, and also a map that shows the Black renter percentage within a zip code. So you can see it also often mirrors, unfortunately, where Black renters are living. We also mentioned holdover evictions, something that good cause would help to hopefully reduce, and that also has a disproportionate impact on Black Maryland residents as well. A 10-point percentage increase in the percent of Black renters in a zip code is associated with 29% increase in the rate of no-cause eviction warrants and a 22% increase in the rate of holdover evictions. So not only are landlords filing more holdover eviction cases against African-American tenants, they're also having more tenants, Black tenants are being evicted because of these holdover evictions. Then I want to go over to what is going on at the federal level and the dismantling of fair housing regulations that's going on, and possibly how Maryland could respond. And so the first big 3 things that I wanted to point out. One is in March 2025, HUD severely weakened the federal regulations requiring jurisdictions to affirmatively further fair housing. That's something that's in the Fair Housing Act that ensures that jurisdictions can't just not segregate. They have to do more things to ensure that segregation isn't taking place, and including they have to affirmatively further fair housing. Those regulations were severely weakened in March. Also, this new administration withdrew critical guidance explaining how how unnecessary excluding people of prior involvement with the criminal legal system can violate the Fair Housing Act as well. And we'll get into some statistics of why that's so important. And then also just a few weeks ago, HUD proposed rescinding its longstanding regulations governing disparate impact liability under the Fair Housing Act as well. We know that's something that has been found in Maryland to have significantly helped reduce segregation in the state in its history. So just going to the criminal legal system and the criminal history part of this, we know that unfortunately there is Black people are disproportionately subject in Maryland to arrest, prosecution, and incarceration. And so just a key statistic to look at is Black people in Maryland make up about 31% of its state's residents, but 52% of the people in jail and 69% of people in prison. And so we know that any type of withdrawal of guidance at the federal level that deals our rollback and guidance related to the screening of tenants with a criminal history is going to have some type of impact on Black renters. And so, one of the things that, next slide, we would like to do that will be coming to your committee is the Maryland Fair Chance of Housing Act, which would codify key protections that were found in that HUD guidance. So it would, one, require landlords to conduct an individualized assessment when screening potential applicants, just so people are looking at the whole of a person. Two, it sets really look-back periods for specific crimes. That was also outlined in the guidance. And it also prohibits landlords from excluding applicants based on just prior arrest alone when there is no conviction. That was also found in the guidance as well. And so we're hoping to have some more conversations with this committee as that bill comes to this committee. Another thing that we want to highlight is the current administration's rollback of disparate impact rules. This was something that was found in Project 2025, and the Trump administration is really holding true to that and rolling back key fair housing provisions. And so, again, we also want to make clear that this is guidance and proposed rules that the state of Maryland has relied on, DHCD has relied on, and that the federal government has rolled back, but it has not, these actions don't change what has happened in the Fair Housing Act and the cases and the case law and the statutes, but it has had a significant and will have a significant challenge on trying to prove housing discrimination going forward. And there's actually a bill to help codify disparate impact here in the state of Maryland as well that would also be coming to this committee. So just concluding, want to just conclude that one, again, black renters are disproportionately harmed by evictions, which leads to increased housing instability for Black families. And unfortunately, this current administration has really abandoned longstanding federal regulations and enforcement related to fair housing, and the state of Maryland has an opportunity to step in and protect its residents. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Get this a little closer. Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the Economic Matters Committee. It's nice to speak with you this afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the state of housing in Maryland. My name is Lisa Sorrow. I'm Director of Litigation and Advocacy with Community Legal Services. Community Legal Services has attorneys in court every day when there is a rent docket in Prince George's and Montgomery and Anne Arundel counties. We see thousands of tenants who are facing eviction every year. I want to talk with you a little bit about the trends we're seeing on the ground. First and foremost, we are seeing a disturbing decline in court appearances by Latino and immigrant tenants. We're seeing it across the board, also in family law and protective order cases, but particularly in housing cases, we're seeing tenants not show up. And when they don't come to court, evictions happen, default judgments are entered, and housing stability follows. What we're told from clients and our agency partners is that fear is behind their unwillingness to come to court. Whether that fear is realistic or not doesn't matter. The fear exists and people are staying away from courts, which is incredibly important or unfortunate because they could have defenses that they're not able to present, and they're losing their housing because of it. Second, we're seeing a serious uptick in health and safety issues in rental housing Tenants are reporting increasingly severe conditions, mold, rodent infestations, lack of heater water, and major structural deficiencies that, despite repeated requests, are not being handled. Maryland does have laws available for tenants living in those conditions. The rent escrow statute, there's a warranty of habitability. However, those are really difficult for tenants to affirmatively bring cases on their own. And legal services providers are loath to be able to do those cases because we're doing the reverse, the defensive cases all the time. You can't bring those defenses to failure to pay rent cases, but it's complicated, and the speed with which cases are handled makes it really ineffective and difficult to raise those issues on the defensive side, which brings me to the final trend that we're seeing that's really disturbing, and my friends in Anne Arundel County, where I am a resident, will probably be not happy to hear that this issue is worst in Anne Arundel County. There is a disturbing lack of due process in the failure to pay rent process in Maryland. The statute regarding failure to pay rent requires that cases be heard within 5 days of filing. That doesn't happen in every county, but it does in Anne Arundel County and some others. What happens is that period of time includes the amount of time within which a tenant must be notified of their trial date. So under the best of circumstances, with that 5-day period, if a county is following the law, the tenant has maybe a day notice, maybe 2 days notice. We see in Anne Arundel County the evening before, often, trial dates. Tenants are being told they have to be in court at 8:45 the following morning. On their way out to work, sometimes they notice it for the first time. There's something tacked to their door that they have trial that morning at 8:45 a.m. That is not adequate time to prepare a defense. And even though I know many people say, the only question is, do you owe the money or not? There are legitimate defenses in these cases. They cannot be raised on a few minutes or a day notice. So I wanted to share all of those trends and hope that you will keep them in mind as you vote in committee and on the floor this session. Thank you so much.
Hello, good afternoon, Honorable Chair Valderrama and Vice Chair Charkoudian and other members of the committee. My name is Jacob Kimmich. I work as a housing attorney, supervising staff attorney at CASA. I do a lot of similar work to what was just described here. I represent tenants on a daily basis in our courts. CASA is the largest membership-based immigrant rights organization in the Mid-Atlantic region. We have about 120,000 members in Maryland, so it's a pretty big block. A lot of our members are impacted by what was described today, high costs in their housing and a lack of affordability. I'm honored to speak with you today, but that said, I do wish that we had somebody else who was here in my place. I reached out to a lot of folks who I wanted to come and speak with you, but they explained to me that it was difficult for them to be here. It was too expensive. They had to go to work. They couldn't miss that. They feared retaliation by ICE, just like what was described in the courthouse. Just speaking in a public place like this might put a target on their back, and they're concerned about that. And that's true regardless of immigration status. A lot of folks who are citizens right now are being targeted and hurt by ICE. I'm from Minnesota, and you've probably seen the news of what's going on there. It's something that could easily happen here, too, on a much larger scale, and it is happening here. That said, every day people have a lot of trouble getting here and providing you with testimony that you need to hear. So I do encourage you to reach out to your constituents. That's true in Montgomery County. It's true in Dorchester County. People are cost-burdened, and they need help. I just want to talk to you about one of our members today. Her story to kind of illustrate what it is that's pretty common for a lot of folks here. I wanted her to come in person, but again, she was fearful of coming here. One of our members, her name is Pilar, called her office because her landlord told her that she had to leave her home immediately. She explained that she'd been living in her home for about 6 months when she got a legal-looking letter on her door that was addressed to her landlord. It said something about a housing license. She didn't quite know what it said, so she showed it to her landlord, trusting him, and he told her that it said that she needed to move immediately. And didn't have an explanation for why. She didn't think it sounded right, so she reached out to us, and that's why we're here. Pilar texted me a picture of that letter, and I immediately saw what had her landlord so worried. The city had found out that he didn't have that license to rent, and was ordering him to get an inspector to make sure that everything was safe. That inspection would have included things like not having lead paint, having working heat in the property, and keeping the property rodent-free, among several other things. So rather than have the inspector find something wrong, he thought he'd just skirt around the law and force Pilar to move out before somebody else came knocking. Pilar said that if the landlord didn't have a license, she'd be okay with moving because she wants a safe home. But she'd need more than a day or so to actually find a place to live in next, and it'd have to be affordable. I explained to her that she does have the right to a safe home and that she can withhold rent lawfully if her landlord doesn't keep a safe home or keep that rental license. So she started to open up to me and explained that this isn't the first time that she's run into a landlord like this. Her last landlord was a tyrant who gave her a basement apartment with horrendous leaks, mold, and no heat. She put up that situation for 4 years before she moved. She missed 1 month of rent, and her landlord got extremely mad, said that his sister was an ICE agent, and he called ICE on Pilar's mom, who he said didn't think she had legal status yet. He had her family's numbers as emergency contacts and then started to make the same threats to them directly. So mom and sister started getting calls. Pilar paid this off, but he kept up the threats. To this day, he still calls her family at all hours, many times in a row, threatening that his sister is going to get them all deported if they don't pay what has been now inflated to about $5,000 in these imaginary late fees. A lot of tenants don't know their rights. That's, again, why we're here. But back to the landlord at hand, the one without the license. After I talked to Pilar, she held on to her rent to try to get her landlord to fix those things. His first instinct wasn't to actually fix those problems. Instead, he turned off her air conditioning, locked the utility closet to try to get her out. This was during that horrible heat wave last summer that killed about 21 people. By the way, our air conditioning in Maryland isn't covered under our rent escrow statute. As things get hotter and hotter every year, it's going to be important that we start to include that and consider that as a safety matter. Again, 21 people died in just 2 weeks last year. Then he tried to claim that she was a squatter and not a renter, because the eviction process for squatters is already faster and easier for most landlords in Maryland, even faster than that failure to pay rent process that we've just talked about over here. Thankfully, he lost that case. My client had Facebook messages back and forth where he said, you've been paying the rent just like you're supposed to be doing. But had she not had those Facebook messages, there would have been no proof of their verbal contract together. And he probably would have won the case, frankly. Again, Pilar is just one of many tenants that I talk to on a daily basis. Her story just illustrates that range of tactics that landlords use to retaliate when tenants raise their rights. We really do need strong protections for tenants. That's going to include anti-discriminatory measures, fair housing measures, and it's also going to include just cause eviction or good cause eviction, which you've heard a bit about. I'm from Montgomery County. I can speak to you a bit about vacancy control and what that means, and the rent stabilization law that's there as well. I'm happy to go into some of the bits of that too, but thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your advocacy work. Delegate Pruski.
Thank you to the panel. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one quick question because Anne Arundel was picked out. I think you said it 4 or 5 times. As the chair of delegation, I have a question.
Sure.
Where is the issue? Is it with the court judiciary? Is it with the processor? I want to be clear on your comments.
Yeah, so thank you for asking that, Delegate Prosky. I want to make absolutely clear, this is not a sheriff issue. Okay. The sheriff is being asked to do an impossible job, and that is to provide reasonable advance notice to tenants of their eviction dates. He can't do it. It's not physically possible to go out with a stack of 300 complaints that you've received maybe 2-3 days before a trial date and tack that complaint to every single door, 300 of them, within a reasonable amount of time before trial. The issue is the statute, 8401 in the Real Property Code, requires that trial occur on the 5th day after filing of the complaint. Anne Arundel County routinely, strictly follows that law. That is not the case throughout the rest of the state, even in the smaller jurisdictions. In neighboring jurisdictions, it's anywhere from 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks longer. So there's a lot more time within which to provide service to the tenants. Our county proudly sticks to that 5 days. And I've been around for 3 different administrative judges in Anne Arundel County. all the same. It's 5 days, period, despite the fact that even the sheriff is crying uncle. It's not possible. So you will likely hear from Sheriff Sesker with a very reasonable concerns about what they're being asked to do and not being able to meet the
And one quick follow-up, I'll look up the section myself, but I'm
Sure.
just curious, is that 5 business days or 5 days? I want to be clear, and I'll look at the section, but if you have an answer.
Right, it's 5 business days. They try to get the complaints as early as they possibly can. It ends up being less than 5 any days. They end up having to go out and serve on Sundays, on holidays, for the trials the next day. I have stacks and stacks and stacks of judgments that show the service date on the top as day 1, the judgment date, day 2. The next day. There is no minimum period listed for notice in the statute. So even in jurisdictions where the time between filing and trial is longer, there's no guaranteed minimum amount of time that tenants are going to have before their trial. So it can be very, very short.
Thank you. I'll follow up with you.
Yes,
Thank you.
thanks so much.
Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Chair. And can I follow up on that for just a moment? So,
sure.
And first off, let me just say thank you for your advocacy. The vast majority, I would say, of landlords are not your problem. There are obviously going to be many cases where you do need your supports to help people, and I acknowledge that readily. A landlord is required by Maryland law to provide 10-day notice. All right, so you can do it by email, you can do it by text message, physically going to the house, sending notice. So, when we start talking about timeframes, I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing because, 10 days is how many days they get to acknowledge before a landlord can even file in court. But even if we take your very aggressive 5-day stance, I know that in most other counties, they allow for private process servers. You don't have to use the sheriff to deliver these notices, and unless I'm talking about something different or a different county. But let's just take the 5 days that you're talking about, okay? After a judgment is made, how many days, and I'm going to ask the question, how many days after a judgment does the landlord have to wait before they can file for the writ of restitution, the warrant for restitution?
So I just want to make sure we're talking.
Please, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, do you want me to? So I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. There is a 10-day notice that landlords are required to provide, and that 10-day notice is a notice of intent to file a lawsuit. So you could file a 10-day notice today and then have a trial scheduled in 2 months based on that 10-day notice. That does not mean your trial is going to happen in 10 days.
My only point is to say that the tenants are given notice. It's not as if they don't have fair notice that a court case can be coming forward, which is my only point.
Right, yeah, there's a 10-day notice that something is going to happen out there in trial. And then there's a second mandatory notice that the statute requires that the tenant be given notice of their trial date before the trial occurs, but it can be minutes before the trial occurs, and that's adequate service under the statute.
But let me just complete, and I hear what you're saying.
Sure.
After a judgment, how many days does a landlord have to wait before they can file for the repossession of the property?
They have to wait 7 days. I believe there was a change in the law last session. So they wait 7 days and then they request a warrant of restitution.
Okay, and then the last thing, after that happens, and I'm not trying to be, I think I know the answer. I'm asking honestly.
Sure.
What are the obligations of the landlord once that happens before the sheriff shows up and conducts an eviction? So there is multiple adequate forms of notice that after judgment, after the 7-day period goes by, that a landlord has to provide before the sheriff can actually perform the eviction. So what does that look like?
So it's different time, the timing is different in each jurisdiction depending upon the availability of the sheriff to do the eviction, to actually go and observe the keys being changed or the locks being changed. They have to wait 7 days to request a warrant of restitution, and that's what they give to the sheriff to say, I have authority to conduct this eviction. And they schedule the eviction date with the sheriff. Now, until last year, until this body passed law last year, there was no additional notice necessary, no notice.
So I'm asking you, what is the notice now? Because that happened
The
in
notice
October.
now is that the landlord must provide 6 days notice in advance of the actual eviction.
And what are the things that are part of that notice? What do they have to share with the tenant in that notice before the sheriff, and the sheriff has to demand that information before they'll actually do the eviction. So just tell me what things the landlord
So
has to do in that notice.
what the landlord needs to include in that notice is it's all contained in a court form. There's a mandatory form. And so it will include the case number that the judgment, that the warrant of restitution applies to, and it will include the amount that needs to be paid to redeem, in other words, to pay and stay. And then it also will include the date on which the actual eviction will take place. That whole process is brand new.
And that they can also lose all the possessions they have in their property in an eviction and.
That's included on the notice, yes.
Right. The only reason why I bring it up is we're talking about something that I'm not necessarily familiar with. Maybe this is a county-specific thing, and maybe I'm not experiencing this in the counties I participate in. But the point is, from my vantage point, there is adequate notice with multiple opportunities for correction from a non-payment of rent standpoint. And that's my only observation, notwithstanding the local issue that I might be missing. The only other thing I had a question for was legal defense fund, because I'm intimately interested in this idea that there is a withdrawal of guidance explaining how an unnecessary excluding people with prior involvement with criminal legal systems violates the Federal Fair Housing Act. And I'm mildly curious, what is it that you're getting at that point, first and foremost? I mean, let's forget the political aspect of the administration, but I'm just saying, what is it that you're getting at, and what are you expecting the landlords, or would you like to see the federal and or state government do in respect to this? Because what my ears are hearing is that you are trying to make sure that landlords aren't able to do what I would call criminal background checks. Now, in a multifamily setting, it's pretty simple. I would argue that, you can't have people come into the property that have, certain crimes. I'm not going to say all crimes, but certain crimes. But I'm trying to figure out where the balance is or what your point was. So let me just stop and say, what was your point in bringing that up?
Yeah, so just bringing that up to show that the HUD had guidance going all the way back to 2016 that pretty much outlined that because of racial factors and other factors of protected classes, that if you have some type of blanket criminal history ban or anything like that, that could be violation of the Fair Housing Act. And so that gave, and there was also a proposed rule in which HUD outlined different things like we talked about, the individualized assessment, things that landlords could do to to ensure that they are, in standard with the Fair Housing Act. And now that guidance is gone. And so we're trying to see if we can create some state guidance here that mimics or is very similar to what that federal guidance had.
So offline, maybe you and I'd love to.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think we're going to get there. At some point, I think a landlord has an obligation, responsibility to provide safe housing for certainly people around them. And I'm unsure what even when I heard what you just said, but I don't discount what your concerns are, because I believe that you're coming from the right perspective for the point of people need housing even if they've had some difficulties. I just don't see the connection between providing that at the same time providing a safe environment for other people that live in a multifamily place. That's what, and we can do that offline.
Okay, yeah, that sounds fair.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I would highly encourage the ongoing communication with Delegate Adams and any other member of the committee, thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Members, this will conclude our briefings. I just want to mention a couple of things. Staff has asked respectfully that if you have to take calls, could you kindly take them outside in the hallway, outside the offices, because it's disturbing those in the respective offices. Also, I just mentioned that we have a couple more briefings next week, but we will also start bill hearings next week. So with that, everyone get home, get safe, and see you guys Monday, floor at 3 p.m.